Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order the King County Council meeting for Tuesday, May 12th, 2020. My name is Claudia Balducci. I'm the chair of the council, and I'm going to ask our clerk, Melanie Pedroza, to please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
Here.
Councilmember Dunn.
Here.
Councilmember Cole-Wells. I can see you're on mute, Councilmember. Oh,
here.
Thank you. Councilmember Lambert. You were on mute as well. Councilmember Lambert.
Here.
Councilmember McDermott.
Here.
Councilmember Upthegrove.
Here.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Here.
Councilmember Zahalai.
Here.
Madam Chair.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have all 9 members.
Very good. So as in previous meetings, we do not have access to our chambers or a flag. So we're going to skip the flag salute for this month, but I do like to take a moment at this time to express our appreciation as a council and as a government for everybody who's out there working on the front lines during this coronavirus public health emergency, people who are first responders, who are working in hospitals, who are working at grocery stores, who are helping our kids stay educated and doing all the things we need to keep going. So just take a moment to appreciate the frontline workers who are out there keeping us going. That brings us to the approval of the minutes for April 28th, 2020. Councilmember McDermott.
So moved, Madam Chair.
The minutes are before us. Any comments, questions, or changes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? In the opinion of the chair, it is a unanimous yes vote, and the minutes are approved. In light of the public health emergency, I think as we all know, the governor issued an emergency order suspending one section of the Open Public Meetings Act, and that is a section that requires us to have a physical space for the public to observe our meetings. This order was extended by leadership of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and so we are meeting remotely, and there is no chamber open to the public at this time. When meeting remotely, we are limited in the matters we can take up to those that are both necessary and routine, or necessary to respond to the COVID-19 outbreak and the current public health emergency. The matters on our agenda today that we're about to take up for briefing or action have been determined to meet those criteria. I want to remind council members that you received an email just recently, only a few minutes ago, with it's called the green folder. It replaces our live green folders that usually sit on the dais, and it has all of the additional meeting materials that have been circulated at this time. It is also green if you open the document, so keeping with the theme. The first item we're going to have on our agenda today is a briefing regarding the status of Metro Transit, and we have Metro Transit Department Director Rob Gannon here to share with us some sobering news and also the current status of our Metro bus system. So, Mr. Gannon, are you with us?
Madam Chair, I am with all of you. I hope you can see me and hear me, as the case may be.
Yep, we can see and hear you. Please go ahead, and thank you so much for joining us again. We know you were with us last time and the meeting went very long, so we thought to put you up front this time so we could be sure to hear the important information you have to share. If you would please go ahead.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Rob Gannon. I am the General Manager of King County Metro Transit. Good afternoon to all members of the Council. My pleasure to give a brief briefing on the status of Metro, and I'm going to reserve as much time as possible to answer your questions, because I know there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on in our system that may be best responded to through your questions. If I may, I'd like to start in echoing the thanks that the chair offered to all of the essential workers in the region. We as an agency are certainly appreciative to all of them, but I'm especially proud of our workforce. As you might imagine, they are showing up to work every day, and whether they are operating coaches, piloting water taxis across the water, maintaining our vehicles, maintaining our transit system, There are so many people doing so much excellent work right now in the face of just overwhelming challenge that it is very heartening and very humbling to see such public service by such dedicated people. So my gratitude is expressed outwardly to all of them. And we are very proud that our agency has been able to sustain service through this difficult period. I'd like to focus my remarks again briefly on sort of 3 or 4 major areas, those being the safety of our system, what we're seeing in terms of ridership and how we've shifted demand, how we are beginning to think about recovery of the system, and then to the extent that it is helpful, I'm also able to give a brief overview of the financial situation of Metro, at least in the current fiscal year. So our system continues to operate, and I think there are 2 major measures that are relevant here. No doubt everybody is understanding that the demand for transit is greatly suppressed right now, with many people staying home. We have seen a decline in our ridership from 400,000 daily boardings on average all the way down to 100,000. So that is about a 70 to 75% reduction, and that has been fairly consistent since the outbreak really hit the Puget Sound region, and since the governor's stay-at-home order has been in place. The good news is that that has plateaued, and what we are seeing is fairly consistent day-to-day ridership of about 100,000 boardings. That is not evenly distributed throughout the region. We are seeing many of those riders continuing to access the system in the south end of the county, and a lot of traffic still moving into and out of the downtown area. We have taken steps, as you, excuse me, are probably aware, to make our onboard experience as safe as possible. We have suspended fare collection. We have restricted the access to the bus to rear door boarding. We have limited the number of seats. We have encouraged and come just short of requiring onboarding passengers to wear masks. And that has been in place for several weeks now. We have been working diligently with our colleagues at ATU to assure that all of our classifications feel like they have the necessary protective equipment, and we are addressing their safety concerns that is most visible with our operators who are at the front of our coaches, continuing to provide service every day. So we've done a lot to work with them. And overall, we think the system is responding to the crisis, and we are attentive to the everyday needs as expressed by our workforce to make it even safer. So we don't consider that we have reached a place of safety. We consider everyday safety as a new and evolving set of conditions that require attention and interaction with our workforce. The safety of our system, of course, is paramount as we look forward to the recovery of the system. And so I can foreshadow for all of you that while we hope the system will rebound to a full level of ridership at some point, that is both difficult to predict and is very likely not to be achieved in the next 6 to 18 months. So we are currently expecting a slow recovery of ridership, though we as an agency will be doing our part to assert that it is safe to board the transit system once the stay-at-home, well, it is safe to board the transit system now, but as people begin to come back to work or engage in more activity, we'll want to reassert to them that the system is safe. Our ridership projections are very difficult to anticipate right now, and so we are planning for a slow recovery over the next 6 months. And internally to the agency, we are trying to be as dynamic as possible, recognizing where and when ridership may bounce back and how to bring the service into play at those moments. We're doing a number of things to gauge that. So our teams have interacted with community-based organizations and large employers. We've sent out some surveys, and we're trying to assess once the social distancing requirements or the stay-at-home order is lifted, how do businesses and community organizations anticipate that employees and other users of the system will start to come back? And so that is a very early effort that is geared to understanding what is the near-term recovery of our system. The long-term recovery of our system is also a big question, and we continue to assess that. We are interacting with partners throughout the country through the American Public Transportation Association to gauge how other systems are responding, how they are asserting the safety of the system for both operators and passengers, and how they are planning for the recovery of ridership, both from encouraging people to come back and also the impact of telework and just faith in the overall system. We are working closely with our partners throughout King County and the other departments of the executive branch to understand what systems of support may be available for all of us as a county organization to secure sort of the economic recovery. So we are plugged in to those discussions as well. We feel like the system can respond, and we have a very firm belief that our internal workforce is ready to respond to that challenge. Absenteeism of our workforce was one of the features that led to some of the temporary service reductions. We tried to be as supportive and beneficial as possible in extending leave to our employees who needed it, whether they fell into a vulnerable category or whether they had other circumstances that required them to be away from the workforce. We will continue that diligence throughout the months ahead, but our workforce seems ready and prepared to help the system come back to full speed. I think the recovery efforts are something that we will have to continue to bring forward through the executive and to the council so that there's a greater depth of understanding. There's also a lot of outreach being conducted with our jurisdictional partners to understand what their needs are and how we can best support the region and keep it connected. The final element, and I'll touch on this briefly, and then Madam Chair, if you are ready, I'll be happy to take questions from you and other members of the council, is our financial recovery will be a monumental challenge. The current revenue loss for the year 2020 is significant. It is the combined loss of sales tax revenue, the primary fund of our system, as well as the loss of fare box. I've given given these figures to a number of you in personal briefings, but I want to make sure that they are well known, that we estimate a loss in 2020 revenue alone to be in the neighborhood of $240 to $265 million. The federal stimulus dollars are certainly a great resource being brought to the transit agency, and that figure is $243 million. So the stimulus, in a sense, covers some of the revenue loss for this year, at least as projected and estimated. But what it will not do is solve our challenges in the future years, in the 21-22 biennium, as we begin, like so many others throughout the region and the country, to try to assess the impact of the economy overall, the impact of the virus to the economy overall, what sort of recession may occur, and how long and how deep that recession will be. No surprise to all of you, we are busy preparing our 21-22 budget, getting it ready to submit to the executive. A lot of these questions are being wrestled with right now in the midst of great uncertainty, and we will be working with the executive branch to bring that proposal forward, but we will also commit to being as transparent as possible with all of you. We know that it is a great treasure, this transit system of ours that serves the entire region, and our effort is to be as transparent as possible, not only because we serve many jurisdictions, but because we serve many communities, and they have a clear need to understand how the transit system can support the future of this economy and its recovery. So, Madam Chair, with that, I will pause and I will happily take any questions that you or other members may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gannon. I appreciate your being here with us today. It's a tremendous challenge. I don't know that any of our transit systems in this country have ever experienced anything quite like this. Members, questions or comments for Mr. Gannon? Not hearing any. I will ask you, you may have said, you alluded in this direction, but of the CARES Act funding that came directly to transit agencies, how far does that funding go in terms of time to sort of, if we were to continue running as we are today?
Madam Chair, if I understand your question, it is sort of a run rate question. So there's $242 million, or right about there, maybe $243 million coming into King County Metro as our portion of the funding coming into the region. We can use that as the mechanism to use it is through reimbursement from the Federal Transit Administration. And we expect that we will consume most, if not all of that in the current year, in the year 2020. Anything that would be left over would likely go to supplies and additional expenditures that are incurred as the pandemic continues into the next biennium. We do not anticipate having any of that resource available in the next biennium. So we think it is a current year run rate, and it will likely be exhausted before the end of the year.
Yeah, we saw yesterday that Metro, along with Sound Transit and some of the other major transit agencies in the country, signed on a letter to the leadership in the U.S. Senate and House to share the concerns and the challenges facing our transit systems and how important they are to our economy and our economic recovery, and encouraging them to make more resources available to help to preserve these agencies, which I think is smart. So one of the challenges that we have obviously is procedural, as you see. And when we start to have conversations about things like budget proposals, possible service cuts, the council here, but also our city partners are obviously going to be extremely interested in having information and input as we go forward. And our regional committees are not functioning at the moment because of some of these challenges, but I just put that out there for discussion at a later time about how we can engage our partners who are reliant on our system and represent the folks who rely on the system and who are big advocates for our system to try to help us with the hard decisions ahead. And I will pause there in case there's anybody else who wants to say or ask anything of Mr. Gannon before we move on in the agenda. Okay, seems like people are either stunned into silence. Councilmember Lambert, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Can you leave us unmuted so we can mute and unmute so we can call out? Because right now we're stranded.
Can you not unmute yourself?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to ask Melanie to work on that. I think we can make you co-hosts and then.
Yep, I'm working on it now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Councilmember Lambert. Did you want to say something to Mr. Gannon or just to make sure that you had control, which is important?
Thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were very potentially quiet because we couldn't speak, but I want to thank Mr. Gannon for the time he spent with me this week, and I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And please don't hesitate to be in touch with us if there's more information you need to share or anything we can do to assist in our role.
Madam Chair, members of the council, by all means, and I just want to express that Metro is committed to staying in close coordination when and wherever possible with everybody from community organizations to elected officials throughout the region. So procedurally, we may be limited, but that doesn't mean that we aren't actively engaging in as much outreach as we are capable of. So with that, I just want to also thank the council for its service and its guidance and its ongoing support of the transit agency. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Rob. Take care and send our best to all of your folks.
Indeed, I will. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, there will be one public hearing on the next 5 items, items 7 to 11. I'm going to call on Councilmember McDermott to move to relieve the Budget and Fiscal Management Committee in order to take action on items 7 and 8.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on that motion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any folks who can't signal a vote, wave? Okay, the motion carries. This brings us to public testimony today. And before we hear from the public, I just want to be sure that everyone who has called in understands how we're going to manage this process. It is obviously a little clunky compared to how we can do this in person. We are hearing testimony today only on items 7 through 11. And as all members of the public join the meeting, you are automatically muted. We can see your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number. When it's your turn to speak, our clerk will call your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number and then unmute your line. If you've muted yourself as a courtesy on your phone, you'll need to unmute so we can hear you. And then if you would, when you're called on, please state your name so that we can, and then pause it for a moment. State your name and spell your name and then pause for a moment so we can be sure to hear you. And then I will indicate okay to start your testimony. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. At the end of 2 minutes, we have a timer, which you should hear go off. At that point, if you're in the mid-sentence or mid-thought, please finish your thought, but please wrap up your comments quickly if you would, to allow the next person to speak. If people go routinely much past 2 minutes, I will try as gently as possible to cut you off. If you're listening on TV or streaming, please turn that function off while you are speaking when you're unmuted. Otherwise, we'll hear feedback on the line. I don't expect this to happen, but if anyone is disruptive in the meeting, we may have to hang up on the call in order to enable us to continue with our meeting. Once you have provided your testimony, I'm going to ask that people please hang up the phone call and continue to watch the meeting either on King County TV, channel 22, or stream it online, which is at www.kingcounty.gov/council. And then there's a button you can click on that says watch us live. That helps us to manage the meeting better when there's fewer people on the Zoom call, and you can still watch and see everything we do. Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask the clerk to read the items for public testimony into the record. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 7 is proposed ordinance number 2020-0061 relating to the sale of real property interest to Sound Transit for the downtown Redmond Link Extension Light Rail project located in Redmond, Washington in Council District 3. Item 8 is proposed ordinance number 2020-0152 relating to the condemnation of certain properties required for the North Mercer and Natal Interceptors upgrade project in the city of Mercer Island and city of Bellevue. Item 9 is proposed substitute ordinance number 2020-0177 related to COVID-19, making a supplemental appropriation of $1,505,000 to several general fund agencies, making a supplemental appropriation of $24,991,000 to several non-general fund agencies, making a supplemental appropriation of $5,719,000 to Capital Improvement Fund 3311, making a supplemental appropriation of $25,199,000 to Capital Improvement Fund 3951 and declaring an emergency. Item 10 is proposed ordinance number 2020-0178, approving and adopting the settlement agreement negotiated by and between King County and King County Corrections Guild, Department of Adult and Juvenile Detention, representing correction officers and sergeants, and establishing the effective date of the agreement. And item 11 is proposed ordinance number 2020-0179, approving and adopting the memorandum of agreement regarding the COVID-19 emergency nurse staffing agreement covering employees in the Seattle King County Department of Public Health and the Department of Adult and Juvenile Detention, and establishing the effective date of the agreement.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. At this time, I'm going to open the public hearing, and I'm going to ask our other council clerk staff, Angel Allende, to please go ahead and help us by reading out the names of the people to speak and then unmuting them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first person up to speak is Andrea Ray. You are unmuted. Go ahead.
It shows her as muted. There we go.
Thank you.
Again, Andrea Ray and I have the pleasure to serve as the President and CEO for Seattle Southside Chamber, a nonprofit dedicated to connecting, convening, and creating economic opportunity in South King County. And I'm here to express our support for file 2020-0177. Specifically, the Seattle Southside Chamber would like to offer our support for 3 items in the proposed ordinance. First, small business relief. Small businesses are the backbone of our local and regional economy and will be key to our recovery. Local chambers of commerce are instrumental in serving our small business community, and we are struggling too with the impacts associated with the pandemic. We are a critical partner working closely with both our local businesses and our municipalities. County funding can help chambers continue to provide much needed services such as our Southside Mitigation and Recovery Task Force, SMART, technical assistance to small business, outreach, education, marketing, and promotion. Working in one of the most diverse communities in King County, we are also strong supporters of the translation services. Second, tourism. Hospitality and tourism is a large sector in our local economy and has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Including funds for Visit Seattle and the Seattle Southside Regional Tourism Authority will help one of our largest sectors recover quickly. Third, arts and culture. With 2/3 of local artists unemployed and with an economic impact of $175 million, supporting arts and culture makes sense from both an economic lens and a community lens, as communities need access to arts and culture now more than ever to help boost morale and connect. Thank you to the King County Council, staff, and the executive for your leadership and support during these unprecedented times. Together we are stronger. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next person up is Diane Dobson. And I don't see her on our list, so I'll come back to that one later. Tom Norwalk.
I've unmuted you.
Good afternoon. Hi, this is Tom Norwalk.
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hi, NORWALK, and I'm the president of Visit Seattle. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Madam Chair. Here, obviously, to support the additional tourism funding initiative. The industry is so severely impacted through COVID, not only currently, but what will continue on into the future, does require a long, slow build of our tourism economy. With deep regard and sympathy for the full tragedy that we've gone through, the effects that we've had, it's time to plan for recovery. And every destination, every state we know currently is in the same process of planning. It will be competitive. Our tourism recovery plan certainly will be phased in. It talks about recreation and outdoor recreation in East King County. It's wine tourism. It's arts and cultural institutions reopening, restaurants and attractions, and certainly the over 350 lodging establishments throughout the county. Our sentiment and research shows that 55% of those surveyed nationally plan to resume travel within 1 to 6 months following the opening up of the areas. And 75% of those think that their first trip will be a road trip. And about half of those are saying that's going to be less than 100 miles, which is exactly the opportunity and exactly the reason why our tourism plan takes into consideration King County should thrive and rebuild. And this is a market we want to own and grow fast. The tourism plan anticipates that, and we're ready to go when it's safe to do so. We deserve and need to capture and recapture this market. We will start rebuilding jobs and the tax base that this creates. And it can only happen, of course, when it's safe, but when consumer confidence tells us it's ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norwalk.
The next person on the list is Megan Ching. You are unmuted.
Hi, this is Megan Ching, Meganching. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of emergency funding for tourism promotion. I'm the general manager at the Seattle Center Monorail, and I also serve as the president of the Puget Sound Attractions Council, which is a membership-based organization comprised of 30 of our region's most popular attractions. It includes our county's top museums, zoos, aquariums, arts and cultural organizations, sightseeing, and tour companies. COVID-19 has been a devastating blow to the tourism hospitality industry, and it's resulted in the temporary closure of all 30 of our attraction members. All of our attractions depend on tourism attendance, and tourism is a key component of our business. Once it's safe to do so, we need a regional marketing plan that welcomes guests back to our attractions and cultural institutions. We believe attraction visitation and tourism will return as a result of thoughtful, intentional marketing and outreach, and it's not going to happen on its own. We need a dedicated approach, leadership, and resources for our region's tourism authorities. More visitors and guests visiting our attractions mean that we can provide more jobs in our buildings, and that's what everyone really wants and needs right now. Please support emergency tourism promotion funding. Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
next person on the list is Kimberly Ehlert. You're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Can you hear me?
We can
We
hear
can.
you, yes.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Ellertson, Ellertson. I'm the Executive Director for the Woodinville Chamber, and I'm here to comment on the proposed legislation for future lodging tax collections for much needed tourism recovery program. I've spoken with many tourism-related business owners in Woodinville about the impact of COVID-19 on their business, and I want to share a few of their stories with you. Price is the founder and owner of Adventura. He's been in business for 18 years in Woodinville. His company has two divisions: recreational entertainment and corporate team building. In April of 2020, he had nearly $250,000 in booked business for this year. By May 1st, he saw a cancellation rate of 99% of that business. I've heard from wineries who completely shifted their sales channels in a matter of weeks. Their biggest ask is for marketing assistance so we can help tell their stories. I've spoken with a local B&B who shared this quote: "What we need most is a concentrated tourism plan to revitalize our entire area after the virus is over." These are just a few of the many, many testimonies I've received from the hundreds of tourism-related businesses in Woodinville. Now more than ever, the tourism industry will depend on nonprofit destination marketing organizations like Visit Seattle to implement marketing programs that will jumpstart tourism business recovery. This funding is essential for them to be able to stimulate visitation, expenditures, local and state taxes, and employment. Please approve this proposal quickly so King County can start the recovery marketing process for tourism. Woodinville so desperately needs this. Thank you to the King County Council for your support during this time.
Thank you.
The next person on the list is Lillian Ballesteros. I don't see her name there, so I will come back. The next person is Tom Douglas. And I also don't see him on the list.
Angel, Armando Pavone is next.
I will do Armando next.
Thank you.
And you are unmuted, Armando.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. I'm Renton Mayor Armando Pavone, ARMONDO-PAVONE.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm here again to reiterate our appreciation for the significant work King County is doing during this pandemic, and to thank you for adding to the emergency budget a mitigation fund for local governments impacted by emergency facilities, as well as language requiring County Council approval of a report regarding the continued rationale for the Red Lion Inn de-intensification shelter. You have our applause and respect for the work you are doing. We just ask for the respect to be mutual and for the transition plan that asks others in the regions to do their part after the lease is over, just as my community has done its equitable share and more. Renton has never been a NIMBY or just say no attitude city. We are working hard to be a compassionate community for more than 200 residents with high intensity needs. We are caring for them the same way we care for over 105,000 other Renton residents. But I ask for your understanding that Renton simply does not have the infrastructure to accommodate a shelter of this size in the central core of our community for more than a few months. In just over a month of operation, we've had over 104 calls for fire and police services to the Red Lion Inn facility alone. The Renton Regional Fire Authority is seeing 28% of its entire call volume directed just to this one location. And the police have responded to as many calls to the Red Lion and the surrounding area in the first 10 days of May as they did in the same period for both 2018 and 2019 combined. Unfortunately, this solution is not sustainable. It's not equitable, and it's not fair to ask one community to do it long-term. We have valued the effort you have made, and we ask that you value our effort as well. Thank you for doing all that you are doing.
Thank you. The next person on the list is Valentine Kaspar. And you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
This is Valentin Kaspar. I'm the owner of the Save More and Ideal Pet Store. Kaspar, C-A-S-P-A-R.
Please go ahead.
So we all want to stop the spread, and since nobody listened in January, February, and March, now I think people start listening. And in order to stop the spread, we need to make wearing face masks mandatory. What I've seen on the weekend on Lake Washington is just insanity. I mean, powerboats with 15 people on it, nobody wears anything. But at least indoors, they need to wear face masks. I mean, this thing, I have friends in Wuhan, and I can tell you they shut things down with martial law. Unless we at least do some face masks, some social distancing, this will drag on for a long time. The schools won't open up, and we'll deal with this till a vaccine is found. So I urge the council to make face masks not just, please wear them, but yes, it needs to be mandatory and enforced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next person on the list is Bianca Davis Lovelace. You are unmuted.
Yes, my name is Bianca Davis Lovelace, spelled BIANCA-DAVIS-LOVELACE. Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Bianca Davis Lovelace, Executive Director of REACH, which provides homeless services and emergency shelter for those in need in the Renton community. My professional background includes experience working in public health and early intervention. So you have my respect and admiration for what you are doing during this massive pandemic. I also appreciate that you are including in your emergency ordinance the mitigation fund and lease renewal provisions the mayor mentioned, and that you provided some funding to REACH in view of the additional strain that is putting on our extremely limited resources. But just as we respect and honor you, we urge you to respect a Renton population that is made up of 54% community of color. That's important because Seattle-King County Public Health Study revealed that the Hispanic population is 2.5 times more likely than the county's white population to die from COVID-19. African American, Hispanic, and Latino residents account for 1 of every 6 people in King County, but they account for over 1/3 of all the COVID-19 cases of infection. Equity and social justice is something I know you take serious, as do we. But if we are going to live by that policy, we should be extremely concerned by a situation where Renton, which already has one of the highest rates of infection in this county, is now caring for more than 200 new residents who very often don't wear masks and probably won't be doing so until your May 18th public health order kicks in. As the mayor said, this is not about playing the not in my backyard card. I have tremendous respect for Seattle-King County Public Health and the people at the DSC who are doing their very best day in and day out. But to ask Renton to keep bearing disproportionate impacts or to expect an organization like REACH, which survives primarily on the strength of volunteers to keep taking on this overload is asking a lot. In the spirit of equity, I urge you to value our work and have a transition plan so that this work is temporary, not permanent.
Thank you, Reverend.
The next person on the list is Monty Anderson. And you are unmuted.
Anderson. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for participating here. This is it's nice to see people still having a voice here during this COVID-19. I want to talk briefly before I get to the tourism recovery program. I want to thank the King County, especially the council members. We've been obviously construction workers have been out there since the beginning of this. And King County is doing an excellent job putting up some dashboards for us so we can track COVID-19 programs to make sure that they meet the requirements. And King County has been a leader in that, and that comes from the council's leadership and Dow, and we appreciate that. So, but I'm also here to speak about the tourism recovery program. I am part of a group call with 17 major cities all over the United States. We talk about a lot of different things here in the COVID. One of them that came up 3 weeks ago was about tourism, came up about dollars in hotel spending, mostly like in Los Angeles and Chicago and some on the East Coast. And I was amazed to see how large some of these budgets are. You know, our area is beautiful and it sells itself, but it started the wheels ticking here a little bit and made me look back at what we're doing here. And I think we can always do more. I want to let you know that we have complete confidence in Tom and Visit Seattle over there. They do an excellent job. And I would encourage the funding for the tourism recovery program. And once again, thanks for all your leadership.
Thank you, Monty.
Madam Chair, the next person on the list is Pat Kraft, or not on the list, but in our drop down. And I am going to unmute Pat Kraft.
Hi, I'm Pat Kraft. I am the president of the Magnolia Chamber of Commerce. It's Pat Kraft, C-R-A-F-T.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
We appreciate, number one, that you're holding this meeting. Thank you for taking this extra effort, inviting us into your homes, as it were, and putting yourself out there and trying to make things work. Obviously, very difficult times. The Magnolia Chamber of Commerce is in very much support of the fund that you're trying to establish to help reach out to chambers, to help at the local level. It's an exciting idea. It's very exciting, actually, as I read through it in detail. And the partnership, I think, builds success. What we do as a chamber, obviously, is advocate at the very local level. We advocate, we educate, we coordinate with all the people around us in our community. Magnolia is about 22,000 people. It's more like a town with a mix of light industrial and a broad diversity and demographic. Our efforts are about trying to survive this condition and, of course, look forward to success. We all know this will be over at some point. And together, I think it's funds like this that'll help us survive, continue the outreach that we already have been working on, and progress. Magnolia is certainly unique by its topography and a critical part of the county. King County has a sewer system here that's based in the Discovery Park. Discovery Park's a wonderful asset for the broader county and city and state. We sit sort of away from the city with this great Burlington Northern Rail track and 15th Avenue Street corridor, which involves a lot of transportation issues. And so set aside in our community, again, is that diversity of employers and employees and all kinds of different groups. I could cite some of the things you might have that we're trying to support in which your funds help us. We have a local cookie company that has a broad reach. We have a high-tech people who have developed tech applications. We have the more common retail cores. We have a garden center and small restaurants. We have a guy who makes tricycles for disabled people. Just a great labor force that we're trying to support, and these funds is going to help us do what we always do. Take a great idea and bring it down to the local level at the front line. So thank you again for your efforts. We support this fund and we hope to participate with you in its success for the broader county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraft.
Next person on the list, John Taylor. You are unmuted.
That may be an employee.
Maybe.
Council member, that's a mistake. I did not sign up for public testimony, but it's nice to see you all.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Next person on the list has a phone number that ends in 136, and you are unmuted.
No, we're not.
I'm hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Yay. Hello, my name is Ann Gose. I'm testifying just as a citizen, and I want to strongly support the $3 million for small business relief programs, specifically in support of chambers, and the role that chambers can play in partnership in helping us not only articulate the needs that we have right now with orders and guidance coming from our state, county, local governments, but also the role, and you've heard that today in other testimony, that we can play as chambers in supporting economic recovery, working to be sure that funds in partnership with the county, that we can help the resiliencies of our businesses as they get back to business. So just want to strongly support that partnership that these funds will create in terms of good partnership between chambers and the county government in getting everybody back to work safely, sanely, and all together. Thank you.
Can you please spell your last name for me?
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
Sure. It's G-O-O-S as in Sam.
Thank you. And thank you for calling in and speaking with us today.
And the last on the list is a person with the phone number ending in 119. You are unmuted. Phone number ending in 119. Would you like to give public testimony? And they're gone. And that was the last I had on the list, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see anybody still on the line for public testimony, but just to be sure, would you please unmute all the lines for a moment, and then I will call to see if there's anybody waiting who has not had an opportunity. Okay, all lines except for some council members are unmuted. Is there anybody on the line who would like to give public testimony who has not had an opportunity to do so? Please say so. Okay, hearing no one, we will please remute the lines, and I'm going to close the public hearing. We will move on in our agenda. Although let me just say, as I close the public hearing, I really want to thank all the members of the public who call in, who watch us online, who are participating in our meetings at this time. It is really challenging to do our work in public, and we're trying as hard as we can to make our activities and our votes accessible to the public, and it's really your willingness to engage that makes that work. So thank you all for your calling with your views. It's very helpful to our council. That brings us to proposed ordinance number 2020-0061. Councilmember Cole Wells, can I call on you to please move this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I move proposed ordinance 2020-0061.
Thank you very much. And we have a staff presentation, but Councilmember Cole Wells, would you like to say something before I call on the staff?
I do believe that we do have a couple of people also who will be available after the staff briefing. David St. John from DNRP and Steve Rizika from FMD. But basically this proposed ordinance would authorize the purchase and sale agreement with Sound Transit on Redmond Link Extension Light Rail Project. Let's hear from April and then we can more. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Welcome, April. Please go ahead.
Sounds great. For the record, April Sanders, council staff. This item begins on page 19 of your packet. Proposed ordinance 2020-0061 would authorize the executive to enter into a purchase and sale agreement to convey both real property and both permanent and temporary easements to Sound Transit for the Downtown Redmond Link Extension Light Rail Project, or DRLE project. As a bit of background, the DRLE project is a part of the Sound Transit 3 system expansion plan approved by voters in 2016, 3.4-mile extension of Link Light Rail into downtown Redmond from the Redmond Technology Station currently underway or under construction. Service is scheduled to begin in 2024. The Sound Transit Board of Directors have already passed a resolution approving the execution of the PSA proposed in this ordinance, and a final alignment has been selected. In March of 2018, Council passed Ordinance 18671, which amended the regional land use permitted use table to allow a regional transit authority facility within residential zones R1 through R8 to be permitted outright. This ordinance allowed the DRLE project to receive permits to run along the northern boundary of Marymore Park, which is zoned R1. Getting into the content of the PSA, it would convey 4.2 acres of real property in Marymore Park. Additionally, the PSA would convey both permanent and temporary construction easements in Marymore Park, the East Lake Sammamish Trail, and quitclaim easements on the Sammamish River. A full description of the property rights and interests to be transferred is in Table 1, which is on page 283 of your packet. And I won't go into detail about each one unless there are questions. King County Code 4.56 lays out various requirements for declaring county property as surplus, including that any surplus property sales greater than $100,000 must receive council approval. Table 2, beginning on page 284 of your packet, details how the Facilities Management Division and DNRP have fulfilled the various surplus requirements outlined in code. Moving on to sale proceeds and other considerations. Appraisals for fair market value of the property and property interest to be conveyed total just over $2.5 million. In partial consideration for the cost of the property and property interest, Sound Transit has agreed to convey to King County a portion of property near East Lake Sammamish Trail, currently owned by a private party for the purpose of East Lake Sammamish Trail Northern Extension Project connection, which is valued at $71,750. That leaves the proposed purchase price of the PSA at $2,474,478. In a separate betterment agreement between King County and Sound Transit, which is referenced but not included as an appendix to this agreement, Sound Transit agreed to construct a regional trail connection project between East Lake Sammamish Trail and the City of Redmond Central Connector Trail at King County's expense, funding for which has been identified through the Parks Levy. Additionally, Sound Transit will be paying approximately $18,000 for the easement application and FMD staff time. The agreement would require an expenditure from DNRP in the amount of just over $94,000 for costs associated with closing and labor. The transaction was anticipated in the current budget, so no supplemental appropriation is required. The project contractor schedule shows work on the subject property beginning in July of this year. So if council wishes to accommodate the contractor and Sound Transit schedule, the executive and Sound Transit indicate that council action must take place today to provide 2 months to complete construction preparation activities. That concludes my staff report. I'm happy to answer questions. And then as Councilor Wells mentioned, we have staff from both FMD and DNRP to answer questions as well.
Thank you very much, April. Council members, questions or comments at this point? The item is before us.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. Well, this is close to my district and actually in my district and my neighborhood is what I was going to say. You did an excellent job on the report, but there are a couple of facts that I wanted to say that show you the importance and the magnitude of this event. This is going to have 1,200 eggs over the entire duration of the contract, which will create a lot of jobs in our regional area. And also they estimate there'll be 2 million labor hours. Prioritizing the creation of jobs is extremely important in a time like this. And this particular project, which we've been very excited about coming to our area for a number of years will certainly help with that. So Sound Transit is planning to work on this summer, and the council action today will, as she said, make this happen. So I'm looking forward to being able to ride to work on this in the very near future. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I'm not seeing anybody. So Councilmember Colwell, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is really an important project, and what's really critical here is the time sensitivity. As Sound Transit's contractor is scheduled to begin work in Marymore Park in July. So this is essential that we get this passed today. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Dembowski votes aye. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Colwell votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Upthegrove.
Aye.
Councilmember Upthegrove votes aye. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 9 ayes, 0 noes.
All right, thank you very much. By our vote, we have adopted proposed ordinance 2020-0061. The next item is proposed ordinance number 2020-0152, and I'm again going to call on Councilmember Colwell to put this before us and make any opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move proposed ordinance 2020-0152. We will not be having a staff report on it. Mike Reed will be available if there are questions. This proposed ordinance would authorize condemnation proceedings for easements that are necessary for construction of the North Mercer Natal Interceptor Upgrade Project. And this project, and especially for council members Balducci and Lambert, I'm sure you know it well, conveys wastewater from Mercer Island, Southeast Bellevue, and Beaux Arts Village. The Wastewater Treatment Division has secured all properties and property interests needed for the project with the exception of one property, and appears that the parties are unable, unfortunately, to reach an agreement. The legal proceedings are expected to take as long as 10 months. So Wastewater has requested action at this time to keep the project on schedule with its February 2021 construction start date. We were briefed on this project last week in the Committee of the Whole, and I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Colwell. Questions or comments on this item? Councilmember Dembowski, followed by, I think it was Councilmember Lambert.
I'll defer to Councilmember Lambert first.
Oh, thank you very much. Councilmember Lambert, followed by Councilmember Dembowski.
Thank you. It's just a procedural question. Is this subject to a motion to leave the committee first too?
That was done at the beginning of the meeting, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Dembowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the nature of this property interest or its ownership? What are we authorizing condemnation of? Is it residential property, commercial?
It is a residential property alongside I-90.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then the only thing I wanted to correct about the reports we received, this is entirely within my district, so I'm very happy to own the whole thing. But that's why I'm familiar. Any other questions, comments?
Just one, can the department confirm that they've made the best efforts possible to work a resolution, including a mediation?
Do we have anybody on the line available to speak? Mike?
I believe Chairman Herron is on the line. I will note that the staff report does describe a pretty extensive outreach effort that includes the initial contact in 2017 with the property, an offer for settlement in 2019, March of 2019, a series of communications since that time. The property owners would, according to the process, be expected to prepare a cost estimate for themselves an appraisal themselves as part of the process. They did not do that. And they have declined to respond to a series of emails in the last several months seeking to pursue the action. So there was an extensive several year outreach effort.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. And do we know whether or not there are language barrier issues or whether they're represented by counsel or an expert?
We do know that at least at one point they were represented by counsel. We have not had any indication that that counsel has withdrawn. So the assumption is that they are still represented by counsel. I haven't had any personal contact with them, so I don't know for sure whether there are language issues. So I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Reed,
Thank you.
Charmin Heron from DNRP is on the line, and maybe she might like to add something to help answer either of the two questions that were asked. Thank you. Go ahead, Charmin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council members, Charmin Heron, King County Wastewater Treatment Division, Government Relations. Yes, I can confirm that the division has made extensive outreach efforts to the property owners. That began with an initial contact in 2017. There was also an offer letter in March of 2019, and there have been subsequent outreach via email and letters to the property owner. There were initial conversations with the property owners. It's not, from my understanding, there is not a language barrier issue. The property owners made some inquiries, but they later also hired legal counsel. And as Mr. Reed said, we're not sure of their current representation. We did have contact with the legal counsel for the property owners. They have not counter-offered, nor have they obtained an appraisal or agreed to mediation at this time. So we have been unable to negotiate an agreement with them. We will continue to do outreach, but they have not been responsive in the last few months.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Domowski, that was all your questions? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members? I'll just add, these are difficult. We don't like to use our government authority to condemn property when we don't have to. And I've been briefed a number of times on this because of it being in the district. There were more than one property that needed to be addressed. We needed some property rights in order to proceed with this project. That is a critically important part of our wastewater treatment system. And all but one of them resolved successfully. And of course, by our vote today, that doesn't mean that this will not resolve successfully. It means that we are approving DNRP to take the next and final step if necessary. So with that, Councilmember Colwell, anything to close before I call for the vote?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Dembowski votes aye. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
Aye.
Councilmember Colwells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Upthegrove.
Aye.
Councilmember Upthegrove votes aye. Councilmember Von Reitbauer. Oh. Go ahead, Oh. Madam Chair, are you unmuting him at the same time?
I did once, but I stopped now.
Okay.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 9 ayes, 0 noes.
Thank you very much. By our vote, we have adopted proposed ordinance number 2020-0152. This brings us to item 9, which is proposed substitute ordinance number 2020-0177.2. And I'm going to call on Councilmember McDermott to put that before us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of ordinance 2020-177.
All right, this item is before us, and I understand we have our central policy staff, Andrew Kim, to brief the striker and line amendments. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Welcome. Please go ahead.
I will direct members, Andrew Kim with central staff. If I can direct members to the green folder packet that that the clerk emailed for the meeting. I will direct you to the amendment tracker on page 3 of that packet. The striking amendment would make the following amendments. First, it would modify the $3 million relief program appropriated to PSB to be an economic development relief program. As you recall, during the legislation that was adopted in Cal was a relief program for small businesses. The striking amendment would change that to an economic development relief program and be limited to incorporated municipalities in the county. The allocation of the $3 million would be broken down to $500,000 for $5,000 grants to every Chamber of Commerce and community-based organizations, $500,000 for $25,000 competitive grants to Chambers of Commerce and community-based organizations, $50,000 for administrative costs, and the remainder of the funds to every city in King County allocated proportionately by population with a minimum of $10,000 to each city, except for the city of Seattle. The striking amendment would also add some additional requirements to the DLS Small Business Relief Program, which is for unincorporated King County, for DLS to make an effort to proactively reach out to Chambers of Commerce or community-based organizations to provide additional assistance to those organizations that need technical support. And there are some other additional requirements as well. Number 3, there is some language that specifies that homeless youth include any persons through 24 years of age. And then there's some additional councilmanic CSO grant allocation and other technical edits and corrections. That concludes my remarks for the striking amendment, Madam Chair.
Myself, thank you, Mr. Kim. Before entering into discussion, I will call on Councilmember Cole-Wells to put the striking amendment before us, and then we have a series of line amendments to the striking amendment. Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move striking Amendment 1 to proposed ordinance 2020-0177.
All right, thank you very much. Maybe we can reserve speaking to the striker as a whole after amendments. Okay, so we have got the list of amendments before us. Andrew, will you walk us through those one by one and maybe we can take them up in order? Mr. Kim still there? There he is. Hi.
Chair.
Okay, please go ahead.
So I am on page 5 of the green packet. Amendment 1 would remove the $4 million and all related expenditure restrictions from the tourism appropriation unit, which would be funded by lodging tax for relief programs consisting of $2 million for culture, $1 million to science organization, $250,000 to organizations that provide education programs, and $750,000 to live music venues. This amendment would shift all those expenditure restrictions and the appropriation to the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget Appropriation Unit, in essence, be funded by the general fund. So this amendment would allow the $4 million to be funded by the general fund rather than the future lodging tax revenue.
And Mr. Kim, I understand Amendment 1, which is mine, and 1.1 are mutually exclusive. So would you brief 1.1 as well before I make a motion or ask for a motion, I guess?
Will do. Amendment 1.1 on page 6 would essentially do the same changes as Amendment 1, but in addition to that, it would specify that the $8 million appropriation for Visit Seattle and Seattle Southside be supported by an interfund loan, which will be repaid by the $9 million allocated for tourism in accordance with Ordinance 18788. if not reimbursed by state or federal monies. So as members may recall, the current appropriation for the $8 million is supposed to be in addition to the $9 million that was currently allocated as per Ordinance 18788. What this amendment would do is not to be in addition to, but utilizing the existing allocation or intended allocation of $9 million to fund this $8 million appropriation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kim. Councilmember McDermott, could I call upon you and ask you to move Amendment 1.1 so I can speak to it, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move adoption of Amendment 1.1.
Thank you. And I just want to explain actually both of these a little bit, if I may. I'm the chair. I call on myself. The goal here is technical. And so for those who are listening and the people who are interested in, testified in support of, are very much in need of tourism investment. This is not to change the tourism investment or the cultural investment or any of the proposals substantively. These amendments are strictly about where does the money come from, leaving the amounts that have been proposed by the ordinance and the striker alone. And the issue is this: if you look at tourism and think back to the work that we did some time ago as a council to allocate the lodging tax money that comes to us from the state, it was broken into three wedges, if you think of it as a pie chart: cultural, arts, tourism, and affordable housing, just to use the headlines. There's details under that, but three buckets. If we are, and it's all in the future, right? All of this is future money that we're pulling forward because the money is currently tied up paying off the debt on one of the stadiums. I want to say it's the currently T-Mobile Stadium. I think I've got the wrong one. Anyway, it's paying off the debt on one of the stadiums. So if you pull forward that money and allocate it now, it's coming from one of those three buckets. It's either coming from cultural, arts, future lodging tax, tourism, future lodging tax, or housing, future lodging tax. And I've asked this question a number of times during this process, and I have been assured many times that we are not trying to take housing future money and put it into the tourism bucket. I have not asked this question, but I will add, I'm also not looking to take cultural arts money and put it into the tourism bucket. I'm not trying to rip up that very challenging place we came to with how we're going to segregate out the lodging tax. It's a little complicated by the fact that I believe two of the buckets are identified as a percentage. So if the amount of the total revenue goes up or down, it floats, those float, and they get a percentage of those 37.5% each. But the tourism bucket has a specific dollar amount identified, which is $9 million. So this amendment, if it hung, would say that the $8 million that we are going to spend on tourism today is 8 of the 9 million that we identified for the future. Now, we can do anything as a body that we can get a majority of votes for, and we can come back, and actually we'll have to come back and look at that ordinance that we adopted, because we're doing something different now. No matter what we do, whether we adopt this striker as is, adopt one or the other of my amendments, any of those three paths, we will be changing something in that ordinance that we first adopted. I am seeking to try to hold harmless for now, for this immediate action, the housing bucket primarily. I don't want to move affordable housing and youth homelessness money out for this purpose today, and hold harmless the cultural arts bucket by not taking what is relied upon by Fort Culture for their future operations, which are very much, by the way, at risk, along with everything else when we look at reduced revenue. So that's the goal here. I put this in front of us, but I understand that there are some serious concerns with it. I haven't heard directly from members what those are, but I wanted to, have the opportunity to discuss it here today. And if there are concerns that I have missed, because we are moving very fast, you all, we have gone through this in like a 2-week process, which would normally take us a lot longer. I would be willing to withdraw this amendment and offer the other more general one, but I would like to have the discussion here today to see what, if any, is the issue with this, because I think this actually says what I understood we were trying to do. And I'll stop there and call on anyone else who wants to make comment or ask questions about the amendment.
This is Rod. I would defer to Councilmember Cole Wells if she wanted to start, or I could try.
Go ahead, Councilmember. That's fine.
Councilmember Dombrowski, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is a project I've been working on since I went down to the Visit Seattle offices on March 9th downtown to meet with Mr. Norwalk after watching the virus and its impacts beginning to unfold. I'll never forget that day because after we left, during the meeting, we heard about some of the impacts, 90% vacancy rates in the hotels. And those hotels, 2% of those charges come to fund this very fund, the lodging tax that we're talking about. Walked across the street to the Cheesecake Factory and talked to the manager after the meeting. The restaurant was empty. He had himself and one employee when normally they'd have 20. Walked down the middle of Pine Street to Pike Place Market, stopped in at the State Hotel. Again, the bartender and one person in the kitchen were working when normally they would have a dozen. Got lunch at the Pike Place Market, which at that point was beginning to thin out. And I think that's the last time I ate out in 60 days. Then, of course, the Pike Place Market is our #1 tourism draw here in King County. This proposal in the package, as it was passed out of committee and as it exists now in the striker, actually does and it take the original idea, worked on that around that time with Dwight Dively to say, hey, things have changed since September of 2018 when we did this first allocation. One, we have this incredible crash, and the tourism investment, which is relatively small compared to the housing and arts and the stadium investment of $135 million, saying, hey, times have changed. This industry's hurting. Can we take another look at that? Is there a way we could bring more resources, not cannibalize the 8 or 9 million that we left there back then, but to add a little bit more? And it does actually, one slight correction, Councilor Balducci, under the proposal, it does use savings from the housing bucket, which is $661 million over the 20 years under the current allocation. It does use savings that we would expect because of these dramatically lower interest rate to take that 8 million and add it to the tourism promotion, bringing it 8 million today, but not taking their 9 million ahead. With respect, my concern about, well, let me talk first about interest rates. I looked, the 10-year Treasury in September 2018, when we passed this legislation, was about 3%. Today, the Treasury sold bonds at about 65 basis points, less than 1%. The rates have dropped 75%. So that's very good because it allows us to do a lot more when we're borrowing money. For example, we borrowed 87 million and then another 100 million already out of this fund to build housing. And so the notion here was, because of the tremendous borrowing cost savings, that we could take a little bit and of those savings, 8 million, and put it over into support tourism to bring people in to fill the hotels, which is the revenue source for this fund. So it was viewed as an investment in the health of this fund. I used the analogy of a leaking roof last time, and I don't think that was the right one. I think what we actually have here is a crumbling foundation. And I think the theory behind this approach is it is reasonable to not do the expansion of bedrooms, maybe do one less bedroom, and protect the foundation so we can continue to build 5 or 6 bedrooms in the home. If that makes sense. If we have this fund that's unhealthy and not generating the revenue, it will impact our ability to do it. So we are hopeful, and the language in the ordinance says that it is our priority to go and get this CARES money, which we have. We don't have to go get it, but to use it as the primary source to pay this, to not have to go over to the interest savings account. But if we do, that is the proposed structure. I would respectfully ask that members think about what this would do in terms of zeroing out, or almost zeroing out. I thought it was 8 million, maybe it's 9 million. I see both numbers that is in the original ordinance, but the risk of zeroing out the lodging tax in future years is probably something that I don't think is a good idea. So I guess what we're proposing is a relatively small investment using a portion of the savings from the housing bucket to make sure that the funds that generate the housing dollars continue to come in. On the $4 million piece, which is I think the same as your Amendment 1, I guess I am wondering about the notion of going to the general fund from that for arts and culture and music venues and science. I kind of like the dedicated fund, the lodging tax, and for that we have a really strained general fund with police and prosecutors, defenders, jail, public health. And I know we also there want to have the CARES Act funding as the priority, but I'd like to hear from Dwight. I wonder if that is a little more tenuous in terms of the recovery purpose of those federal dollars than even the economic development piece. So, Councilmember Balducci, I appreciate your openness to dialogue today on it and the way you brought it forward. That's kind of my thinking on it and the rationale behind it.
Thank you. You asked for Mr. Dively. I wonder if you wanted to respond to that question or comment. I see he's here with us. Hi.
And please correct me if I got something wrong there.
No, I don't think you got anything wrong, council member. So I think all of us have had in our heads the possibility of using the CARES Act $262 million in whole or in part to backfill either of these appropriations that are in your Amendment 1 or Amendment 1.1, Councilmember Balducci. I will just caution that we still have no policies about those funds. And if we committed today 12 million of the 262, it is a constraint on what else we might do. And remember, we need to make that money last all the way to the end of the year. So I think it's wise to leave open the possibility that we will backfill some of this from that source, maybe all of it from that source. But I would hesitate to have you commit to that today, given the lack of policies and given the uncertainty. So that would be my only advice about this. We always entertain the possibility that instead of ultimately loaning lodging tax money, we would use the CARES Act money. I'd like to leave that possibility open, but I would recommend you not decide today that that's what you're going to do.
So let me jump in here in the spirit of dialogue. The first part of the amendment that is on the table, which is identical to Amendment 1, was intended for the same purpose, really. It puts it into the general fund, which is not where I think anybody wants $4 million to be. But I just was very concerned, and I remain concerned, I have to be honest, that we had an extraordinarily public process to determine how we would divide up future lodging tax. And this process that we're doing right now is necessarily extraordinarily constrained. And so I had asked, and I thought I understood the answer to be that we were not going to move those lines around. But the more I looked at how you would meet the size of the package that we're talking about today, the more I realized it's not possible that that could be the case. Of course, we're moving things around. Now we're saying that it will be savings on interest in the housing bucket, but what that does is that assumes a limit on how much housing we're going to provide for the money that we put into that bucket. And I have never assumed such a limit, ever. We have a massive housing shortage, which is only getting worse during this time. And so it was very important to me to try to meet, and I see this as kind of a compromise. Like, I'm trying to meet my colleagues' interests in going first with tourism relief and small business relief and cultural arts relief before we get to housing and sort of crisis stuff for people. And yet try to hold that debate for another day, because look what we haven't had here. We have not had a single bit of testimony from anybody who advocates for housing. Those people don't even know we're doing this. They don't even know because our stuff just isn't it's not as public this way. I don't know why, but it isn't. And people are very busy. I mean, when I reached out to try to have a conversation with some housing advocates, they were busy delivering food and masks to homeless shelters and some of our QIR sites. So it's just a hard thing to do to make, it's a regular, good, Councilmember Dombrowski, it's a good point that this is relatively small compared to either the hopeful total size of the lodging tax in the future or the CARES Act or whatever. But it's a principle that I'm concerned about that I haven't been able to find another way to resolve other than saying that we try to protect this money. So let me ask a question to, I know not whom. I'm going to ask a question and then maybe somebody can help me answer it. If we don't say that the tourism money comes from future, if we don't adopt this amendment, this 1.1, with the second part being the tourism money coming from future anticipated lodging tax, dedicated future lodging tax, because there is a dollar amount on it. If we don't say it comes from there, are we necessarily determining where it comes from, or is that an issue that we can resolve another day, or we'll have to resolve another day?
Dwight, could I ask a related question and maybe almost respond?
You may do either.
I guess, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of aimed at Dwight, but I didn't like him. It's an interesting concept. The notion here is that we are going to do an interfund loan, right? With the preliminary idea of paying it back through the future lodging tax. I guess one idea / question to Dwight would be if we come up with a better repayment source that wouldn't go over into the housing bucket of the lodging tax and use the savings, could we amend the terms of our own interfund loan and pay it back that way? Thereby achieving Councilmember Balducci's goal of not adjusting those percentages.
Yes, that would be very easy to do.
So say that one more time, please. I just want to make sure I understood exactly what you said, Councilmember Dombrowski.
I was positing the notion of proceeding today with the striker as it came out and holding open the possibility, which has an interfund loan to advance these dollars. We have an initial repayment concept today that it would come out of savings of interest, but we could work to find a different repayment source for the interfund loan if we were not able to. And in fact, we would have to if I think we didn't modify the allocation ordinance later, right?
Well, we'd have a conflict that we'd have to resolve somehow, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we do have some additional tools that have been brought to us, the recording fee, the sales tax, which we haven't adopted, but there are some additional housing resources that are out there. I would pledge my best efforts to find those dollars, Councilman Balducci, to not have to go there if we didn't, if that would help. One of the things about the lodging tax is it is designed for this purpose, right? It's a specified call in the statute, and this industry does generate the tax. So it seems like there's a pretty good nexus there. And so there's just a couple of thoughts on how we might resolve that.
So Councilmember McDermott, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If whatever action we take today doesn't preclude, in fact, requires future action to fully resolve where the tourism investment that we would make today comes from, I think that's not a bad place to land today. And that I hear some direction coming together around that. I think it's important to have this conversation, understand what we might do and how it might be resolved and what steps are needed to make that resolution, or what defaults would be in place if no steps were taken in the future. Because Councilmember Dombrowski is right, a lot has changed since September of 2018 when we adopted this. We're in a huge recession because of the pandemic, and we've seen that in hotel occupancy, in restaurants, in arts and culture, but we've seen that in many other places as well. We've seen that in skyrocketing unemployment that is unprecedented in my lifetime. We've seen that in people unable to continue paying employees, laying people off. We've seen that in requests and a debate amongst this body several weeks ago in the Committee of the Whole to even have ask the state and federal governments for a moratorium on rent and mortgages. So there's real need. And at the same time, since September of 18, this council has also had a regional affordable housing task force that has clearly identified the need for affordable housing, both when it started and the growth in that need by 2030. And so I think we need to be really clear about the continued emergency around homelessness and the need around affordable housing, and not diverting what would otherwise be resources invested in affordable housing, even with the need before us today. And if we have a conscious choice to have to take action to resolve in any way in the future, I think that leaves us in a good place to have a solid conversation. I'd be very uncomfortable with a resolution today that made that decision to reduce funds that would otherwise be spent in affordable housing.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you. Madam Chair, this is the most interesting discussion, and we do not know the future. We do not know when we are going to be past this horrendous pandemic. And we know that there are people, as Councilmember McDermott eloquently said, without jobs. We don't have enough food for everybody. That is, at least we can get to everybody who is in need. We have people not being able to pay their rent. But until we get the revenue back into our coffers, it's going to be a continuing challenge to do all of what has been mentioned, let alone address our huge demands for affordable housing. And for me, the most compelling part of this is that we live in such a vibrant area where people love to come. The tourists love to come here. Organizations, businesses, associations love to come here to our county to have conventions, to come to events, to spend their money in hotels and restaurants and coffee shops and music venues and going to our premier institutions and organizations relating to arts, culture, heritage, science, and so forth. So this seems like a really strong approach to reap the rewards, to get people here so that we have people being able to fill the jobs at our hotels and our restaurants and all the other locations where people visit. And we're not going to be able to build more affordable housing if our lodging tax revenue is not coming in. In addition to that, as has been mentioned, we are in a market, a very competitive market for bringing tourists and visitors here. Not only is this happening all over the country, as Tom Norwalk brought out, but it's happening around the world. I can commend an article to you that was in the New York Times Sunday Travel Edition entitled, "Where Will the Tourists Go?" And the huge amount of efforts that are going into building the infrastructure, getting the jobs back, making sure that our cultural attractions, our science attractions, our restaurants, and all of that, our retail, are ready so that we can bring tourists and visitors here. But it's also for our way of life. We get a lot of money for our lodging tax from people who may come in from Federal Way, who may want to go to Federal Way for the Performing Arts Center, but also for people who live in Federal Way and beyond who want to come for the weekend to a Seahawks game or to in this case, Mariners games, and spend money here. And we need to be ready. And I believe that's the strongest part of this particular piece of the entire legislation. So I think if we run into a problem with actually being able to expend the funds from the CARES Act, then we can address that. We can come back in with a solution to that, whether it be the general fund or some other source. We can attend to that. But I think we need to go ahead and act on what we have before us now. I think it's a good solution that can be amended if need be. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other council members? Councilmember Dombrowski.
Sorry, I made the mistake of cutting Dwight off, which is always a bad idea, because I think he's a trusted savant, I'll call him. Not savant, Councilmember. Savant.
Thank you for that.
Anyway, I just, when I suggested this in early March, I didn't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea, what problems might be, and Dwight was very helpful in working through it. And I just wonder if we might turn to him for some guidance or thoughts on this approach.
Well, so Councilmember, your idea that you don't have to decide today what the source of the interfund loan repayment is absolutely correct. When we do the interfund loan, we will have to specify a source, or we could even, I don't think we've ever done this before, but we could actually specify multiple sources and indicate that it would be ultimately repaid from one or more of those sources. We also have flexibility about the term of the interfund loan and the payment plan. So it's always possible, of course, to pay them off early. So, and as I think you all know, that is done by the Executive Finance Committee, which Councilmember Cole Wells is the chair of. And so if the council down this path of basically leaving open multiple repayment options, knowing that you will have to come back and decide at some point in the future, that will work perfectly fine.
May I ask a follow-up question? Councilmember Dombrowski, were you done? Okay, thank you. If we don't take action on either Amendment 1.0 or 1.1 today, does that constitute leaving open the question of where the funding is coming from for the $8 million for tourism and the $4 million for other aspects of the program? Or is there something else in this ordinance that says where the funding comes from?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Kim, but if I remember the striker, I don't think it specifies the source of the repayment. Someone should check that. If you, many of our COVID supplemental appropriations have appropriated from a fund, but have been very clear to acknowledge that the ultimate source of funding might be the CARES Act or FEMA or whatever. So I think we've been trying to be very flexible about saying where the source of funding is going to be. And as long as you haven't written something in the striker that's more specific, then I think the ordinance itself is leaving it very open for that question. But I would defer to someone who's actually got the striker in front of them and can find this section.
Mr. Kim, can you do that for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. So as the striker as currently drafted doesn't specify exactly where the fund is coming from. It just says that it's being appropriated using the lodging tax fund. So it needs to be appropriated from somewhere. And currently, as it stands, it's being appropriated through the lodging tax fund. Your amendment would shift that $4 million to be appropriated through the general fund, if that answers your question.
Let me try to play this out. I think it does, but I think it actually, if we act today on this without amendment on the striker and the underlying ordinance as amended by the striker, where that leaves is that the money is coming ultimately from lodging tax, but it does not otherwise say how. It doesn't resolve the bucket question that I'm raising. However, with $12 million coming out of future lodging tax, I don't see how it's possible to not impact those other buckets. And that's why we moved $4 million out into PSB in this amendment, because there's only $9 million total in the old ordinance that is from tourism. And it's, as I said, listed by dollars. And now that the fund itself is going to be flat on its back, as many have mentioned, the likelihood of us getting that full 9 million is challenged. And we're saying that, well, actually, no, the other stuff would come from cultural arts, but it would come from a very uncertain future for culture. Let me stop myself there because that's a rabbit hole. But the other question is, then we would have to come back under different operating circumstances and look and reopen the tourism amendment, the tourism allocations that we made in 2018. I'm correct that we said this before, but I just want to double check that's right.
This is Andrew Kim, Madam Chair. If you adopt the striking amendment as currently proposed, you would have to amend the ordinance 18788. I know that Dwight mentioned something about utilizing other type of revenues. If that is the case, and Dwight, you can correct me if I'm wrong as well, you would still need to take another action to either disappropriate these appropriation from the lodging tax fund and reappropriate that through another fund. Because right now, if you do take action on the striking amendment, there is going to be $12 million appropriated for this particular activity. And we'll need to reconcile that if it's actually coming from another revenue source.
Yeah, so Mr. Kim is correct. There would be, if you leave the striker as it is, as Mr. Kim explained, then you're ultimately going to have to do one of two things. You're going to either have to amend the lodging tax ordinance to reallocate funds, or in some subsequent appropriation ordinance, you would decide that I'm going to make this up, you were going to use some amount of CARES Act money to cover these costs, and you would appropriate either from the CARES Act or from the general fund that amount of money, and then disappropriate the same amount of money from the lodging tax fund.
Got it. Okay. I think we have chewed this one up pretty thoroughly, and let me just close by saying this. I entered this discussion around advancing a tourism program first before we did things like rental assistance to people who have now missed 2 paychecks or more since their last rent was due, and other really critically emergent things, because I thought that this taxing source matched the need for tourism investment well, as has been described in great detail by others, correctly so. Tourism raises this tax source, supports this tax source, is an intended and statutory recipient of this tax source, so that it was a good match. You can't use this money for rental assistance. You can only use it for certain short list of types of uses, and tourism is definitely an important one of those. So that weighed in its favor for me, but also because I understood that we were not going to be reallocating the lodging tax buckets. It seems inescapable to conclude now where we are today that second part is just not right. We are either backing ourselves into a corner where we have no choice but in the future to reallocate the buckets, or we are just doing it now, kind of sub silencio. Yeah, I'll call on you in a second. And the only people that we have heard from, the only people who have engaged with this process are the people who stand to benefit from that change. The folks who might have an objection to it are not here, and we don't have the ability to do a really good public process right now because of the limitations on our action. So I'm going to call on Councilmember McDermott, but I think I'm going to ask for a vote on this. I don't know how it's going to go. Potentially, there's nobody who's going to vote for it but me, but I feel like for principal reasons, I think we ought to be clear about what we're doing and not doing to previous actions that we took with a great deal of public transparency on the crying needs of our community for housing that have only gotten exponentially worse since the COVID started. And I think that we should be on record as to what we think we're doing here, and that way it'll be clear. Councilmember McDermott, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have closed without calling on others. Go ahead.
All right, Madam Chair. I'm looking at table 6 from the staff report from last week. The benefit of working from home is I have all my paper about me and I can pull out things from last week. And even the April 30th preliminary forecast for at the bottom of the table, the funds in excess of the August 2018 forecast has tourism at $34.2 million. So if we're not making a decision now about which pot within the hotel motel tax, the overall 12 million for what I would call tourism is being spent from and we need to make an adjustment later to the ordinance. It seems to me there would be room to do it entirely within tourism, and we could make other choices as well. We're just choice about where, and the ability to do it all from tourism money would exist. Is that?
Councilmember, are you assuming that we have a certain amount of money over the 2018 forecast?
I am. I'm working from the April 30th preliminary forecast that would have $34.2 million in tourism in excess of the August 18 forecast.
Oh, interesting. Okay, Councilmember Colwell's raised her hand, and then I think I saw Councilmember Dombowski again.
So speaking on two things. First of all, the revenue forecast that came in most recently was not based on what had been happening in COVID. It just caught the very early part of that. We are going to have another one coming up that will be more realistic. But that revenue forecast, if we were to take it as an indicator of where our economy was headed toward, it was not appropriate. But the second thing that I wanted to bring up is that I brought this up last week at the COW meeting. I don't see this as a choice that we are making between tourism promotion and supporting institutions that serve as appeals, as draws for people to visit our area, and including for people who live in our county and go to the restaurants and the taverns and the barbershops that are associated with hotels and so forth. But we need to do both. And this language that we have in our striking amendment is one in which the intention is to be able to bring money into our hotels and so forth that will contribute funding for our being able to build very needed affordable housing. And it should not be seen as an either or in my mind. It's a matter of what we can do to get our economy going and being able to afford to pay for the urgent needs that are before us, that are becoming more urgent as we go by day to day. We do not want more people to become in a homeless situation. We needed before this epidemic, this pandemic started, to address that situation. We need it even more now than ever. But we need to get people here to spend money, and we need to get people back into the jobs that they've lost. And a reminder that individuals who work in our hotels, who are working in theaters or had been working in theaters and in restaurants and so forth, live all over the county. Even if we're talking about certain hotels, restaurants, the convention center, whatever it may be, are in Seattle, people work in them from all over the county, in districts all over the county. So I wanted to make sure that I was bringing up that point, and I know I've said it before, but I think it really bears repeating. I, for one, would never be saying that affordable housing is less important than going to a restaurant or putting on an event somewhere. We've got to have it all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Dombowski is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I want to echo that sentiment. I really see this as an effort to support affordable housing. If you don't plant the seeds and water them and fertilize them, you don't get to harvest the crop later. And this is about investing in this fund for the direct benefit of jobs for folks that need jobs in this devastated industry, and for the secondary benefit of the lodging tax and sales tax, which supports things like our mental illness and drug dependency account, which we heard a devastating report on by Dwight last week. So the whole notion behind this was to take care of the health of this fund. Between your two amendments, if members are interested in them, I would strongly prefer your amendment 1 over 1.1, because 1.1 again will zero out all of the future support for the destination marketing organizations. I think there's a path forward if we decline. I really think we're deciding too early today. And certainly if we adopt Amendment 1.1, we are. But on Amendment 1, that at least doesn't zero out the promotional budget for the destination marketing organizations in the future. And I am committed to looking for, and that was always the notion behind this. Priority 1 was get the CARES money to pay for this, right? It's part of our economic response. And Dwight had indicated some optimism on that. And Andrew didn't indicate there, but I believe we've got in the findings section an intent to do that. And we've got those dollars here. I think, frankly, between the two buckets, the economic development package of $8 million is more likely qualified under Treasury guidance than I would say the $4 million package of some of the cultural and arts programs. And so I that's for those reasons I would at least prefer Amendment 1 and ask folks that are interested in this notion to respectfully hold off on this decision for now and continue working on it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before I close for real?
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Dunn.
Thank you. I'm going to take off this cowboy hat that's covering a very bad head of hair, but
I got to see that.
Yeah, getting emails. How do I say this? All I can say is we're facing a challenge unlike anything we faced before in our generation, in our lifetime. In order to overcome this challenge, it is going to take a nuanced approach. Every single dollar we spend, every initiative we take, action we take must be focused like a laser beam on getting us back to where we were, healthy and a healthy economy. And I feel like we're struggling with a set of dollars that sort of isn't within that narrow focus. You can make a good argument that tourism dollars is a way to prime the pump of the economy. But part of the problem we have here is that the state buckets are mandated in ways that really don't let us tackle the new challenges at hand. And so the state legislature and the governor need to get a handle on maybe fine tuning what we can, in fact, use these dollars for. So I'm going to support this amendment because I think there's a little enhanced accountability and a little more where I want to see the dollars spent. But I think more broadly, this whole series of expenditures, even though it's a tiny, tiny fraction of our $11 billion biennial budget, it could be better focused overall into the challenges we're facing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, I want to close. We've really talked. Thank you, everybody, for taking this super seriously. I think no matter what happens on this amendment, whether it's 1.1, 1.0, or none of the above, it's clearly an incomplete thought. We're not done with this discussion. And I want to echo Councilmember Dembowski's commitment back that whatever happens today, we will need to take a look at this lodging tax, and it's going to come to us because the ordinance is going to come to us one way or the other. It's going to come back to us because we're doing things that are slightly different. And we should know more by then, and we should be able to make a better assessment of where the fund should come from. I want to be very clear. All of this is under the table. It's all, where does the money come from to pay for this program? None of it changes the $8 million investment for tourism. It's still going to be there. And the future, 2022 through 2029, that's like forever from now. And anything that we change with an ordinance, we can change again with another ordinance. So I'm going to ask the members to vote on this one. it will go the way it goes, and it is definitely not the end of the story, and it's not, and it doesn't undermine the investment we make today. It poses a different question for us tomorrow, depending on which way we go. And I would encourage us to pose the question that is, how do we deal with future tourism money and future CARES Act money, which we're going to have to deal with anyway. So with that, I'm going to ask, this is an amendment, but I suspect we should have a roll call vote because there seems to be people going in different directions. So Madam Clerk, would you go ahead and call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
No.
Councilmember Dembowski votes no. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
No.
Councilmember Colwells votes no. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Upthegrove.
Nope.
Councilmember Upthegrove votes no. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
No.
Councilmember Zahalai votes no. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 5 ayes, and Councilmembers Dembowski, Colwells, Upthegrove, and Zahalai voting no.
Okay. Thank you. With our vote, the item amendment 1.1 passes, and that moves us to the next amendment. But let me close out this very lengthy and important discussion by saying it just sets a path for more work we have to do in the future. And I think I heard a lot of commitment to work together to do that. So we will continue on. Mr. Kim, the next amendment, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 2, I'm on page 6 of the green folder packet. Amendment 2 would require that grantees for all grants provided in this ordinance implement accountability provisions to ensure grants are used appropriately, which may be detailed in the grant agreement or be described in other documentation. So there's this condition or requirement that that grantees provide that they provide economic benefits to the county, and this amendment would require that they also implement accountability provisions for all of the different grant programs that is included in this ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kim. Councilmember Colwell, do you want to put this one before us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move amendment number 2, and this is actually Councilmember Dembowski as the lead.
Oh, very well. Okay, Councilmember Dembowski, do you want to speak to it? You're unmuted. You are. Yes.
Sorry, I'll defer to Councilmember Von Reitbauer, who requested this language, and I prepared it on his behalf.
Okay. Councilmember Von Reitbauer, are you able to unmute yourself? I will try. It's not working for me to unmute you, unfortunately. Madam Clerk, can you unmute him? I can't.
I can't either. There he
he is.
Did it work now?
It worked now. Go ahead, please, Councilmember.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. It's technology. First of all, I want to thank Councilmember Dembowski and Councilmember Colwell for offering this. The bottom line is just more accountability. I expressed to Councilmember Dembowski yesterday in discussion that I had received a number of inquiries about how we're pursuing this, and I believe that Councilmember Colwell's and Councilmember Dembowski's amendment helps us bring more accountability to the process and more transparency to our constituents. So I thank them both.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seems pretty straightforward. This one I think will be a voice vote if people can unmute and be prepared. Madam Clerk. Oh, actually, Councilmember Zahalai, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Von Reitbauer, could you speak a little bit more to this? I wasn't understanding what is meant by accountability provisions, and are there examples or anything else we could look at?
I'm going to ask my colleague, Councilmember Dembowski, who crafted this after our conversation. Is Mr. Kim, is he working with us? I don't have my paper in front of me. Is Mr. Kim the one who helped draft this? Want to give specific examples?
Andrew, are you able to explain a little bit more about what the amendment does?
Sure. Not that much more specifically, but I think the intent of the amendment, I know the phrasing is a little bit broad, but I think it's to require that grantees follow the requirements as written in the proposed ordinance, that they ensure that they abide by all the rules and regulations of any grant agreements that they sign with the county, and things like that, and ensuring that they provide economic benefits to the county. I'll have to defer to Councilman Dembowski if he wants to elaborate more.
Councilmember Dembowski, do you want to say anything more? Okay, I'm not seeing any more. So Councilmember Zahalai, I think that is the answer that we will have here today on this amendment.
And Madam Chair, one more question. Is this related to the tourism grants, or what is it exactly related to?
Councilmember Zahalai, these would apply to all the grant programs, to the Economic Development Relief Program, the DLS Small Business Relief Program, and all the different programs under the tourism bucket.
Thank you.
So would it include the $5,000 automatic grants to chambers and CBOs as well?
Correct.
That's correct.
That was the intent.
So we're documenting where the money's going and what it's being used for via contracts, essentially, which is normally how we operate when we do grants. Okay. I mean, even when you do a grant out of your own council office, the DCHS and others do contracts for us.
This is just reinforcing what we normally do in a very abnormal period that we're going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Councilmember. Any other questions? I'm not sure if we answered all your questions, Councilmember Zahalai. Just speak up if you want to ask again.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'm going to call for a vote on Amendment 2. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion 2 carries. Mr. Kim, Amendment 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 3 is sponsored by Councilmember Updegrove, and the amendment would modify the requirement for the $25,000 competitive grants under the PSP Economic Development Relief Program. From currently, the language says that currently provide marketing technical assistance and other support to small businesses in King County, referring to the community-based organization. This amendment would change that language to say, with a primary mission to provide marketing technical assistance and other support to small businesses in King County. And again, this is referring to community-based organizations.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Updegrove, would you like to move it and speak to it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of Amendment 3. And speaking to it, I actually think chambers are best suited to provide this work, but there is an interest in also making sure that organizations such as merchant associations, community development associations, other economic organizations that do this work could also compete. And I was a little worried that the current language opened up too much of a loophole, that there could be an arts and environmental, a human service organization where 1% of their work, or maybe they had some little part of what they did had some sort of business marketing nexus. And the intent here was to have these funds available for those organizations that are focused on small business assistance. And so I think this is just a cleanup to assure that those are the types of organizations. And there's a list in there that says including but not limited to things like merchant associations, economic development associations, community development associations, along with chambers. So appreciate your support.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any questions on this amendment? I do have one, and if you will submit your question, Councilmember Updegrove. There are some organizations in King County that are not primarily business supporting organizations, but that do provide what I would call navigation services, possibly translation services, because they are essentially culturally based organizations, and they are a hub where businesses run by members of certain cultural groups or immigrant groups might go to them first. So they just kind of naturally have a side business, if you will, in supporting small business owners. Would an organization like that be eligible under this language or the previous language, or neither?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know without actually knowing more about the organization. Quite frankly, if it were, for example, One America, I pick on them because they're a friend. They probably do some translating for business groups and things like that.
Right.
My intent was for these grants to be going to organizations that were, whose primary focus was that. Originally, the idea was chambers. People wanted to open it up a little, and I understand that. If that was an organization, if there was a cultural organization that's focus was small businesses, I think of, it's kind of defunct now because of displacement, but in SeaTac, for example, there was an organization that was really centered around one physical location at the Bacaro Mall. There was a pretty loose-knit community-based organization there, but it was all focused on the work of the mall there. So I would think an organization like that would be. So I think it depends upon the nature of it, whether or not it's, my intent would be for organizations that are already pretty much in the business of helping small businesses, and not let it be a loophole for, I'll just make an example. If there was an environmental organization whose primary work is cleaning up streams, but they happen to have a little program where they give vouchers, give out restaurant vouchers for people who clean up the streams or something like that. That's a very small part. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to provide some financial support to organizations who, I chose the word primarily, but my intent would be who have an existing significant, whether the word is primary or significant, the intent would be to not have people changing what they're doing in order to pursue funding, but rather people who are doing things for small businesses in a meaningful way continue. So
That's helpful. I thank you.
That's kind of a rambling brain dump of what I was thinking.
No, it's super helpful to hear it. Thank you. Councilmember Colwells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this amendment. I think it would be helpful to clarify, as the council member suggested. I'd also like to bring up that our next amendment, amendment number 4, in a way gets to this. Amendment number 4, and I'm not going to speak entirely to it, but instead of having a work group to develop criteria and guidelines for being able to have the grants administered to small businesses and through chambers and whatever else we want to call others are, whether they be merchants associations or community-based organizations, we would have the PSB reach out to all 9 council members to get their ideas and recommendations, which I think will help refine exactly what Councilmember Upthgrove is getting at. And I think his amendment is useful to be able to carry that out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Upthgrove.
Councilmember Colwells. Councilmember Upthgrove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another aspect that I kept in mind with this amendment and with some of the dollar decisions is that we're back here every month with these monthly appropriations. And in the event that after this program is implemented, we find that there are organizations that competed unsuccessfully, or that we got things wrong, or that there wasn't enough in the way of resources provided for this strategy versus another, we're right back at this. And an example would be I'm not sure what we're calling it now, the Community Outreach Fund, the $1 million that went to the Office of Equity and Social Justice. We put $1 million in last time. We're putting $1 million in this time, kind of as the need is identified. So my original, like I said, my original intent was to try to provide some support to the small chambers around the county, and I wouldn't want it to get so diluted that it becomes that the chambers don't have an opportunity to compete and they end up competing against human service organizations, environmental organizations. But I guess the only other thought is we'll be back in a month if we miss someone or the process doesn't go well.
Lambert.
Thank you, Councilmember Upthgrove. Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. So I just want a clarification. When I'm reading number 3, it sort of puts it in the hands of the people that do it on a primary mission. So the chambers would know in their chamber area who and what needs the most help. And number 4, as I read it, so help me if I'm not reading it correctly, it's kind of all of us kind of trying to talk to Dwight, poor Dwight, all at once for him to kind of figure out how to do it. So I think that as in number 3, it seems like it's more local control, where the people who are doing it and know it could get it on the ground more quickly. If the PSB has to come and talk to all 9 of us, that slows the process down. Help me if I'm reading that correctly.
Madam Chair, want me to take a stab, or do you want to?
It's staff or you. You take a lead.
I can speak. Amendment 3 speaks only to one particular grant program, the one that's outside of the unincorporated areas, 20 grants of $25,000 each to support chambers and community organizations that do economic development. Amendment 4, to my understanding, speaks to how the details of that program will be developed. And that's the best answer I can. That and other aspects of the details of that grant program and other aspects of the economic development program will be developed, if I got that right. So I don't think they're exclusive, or I think they're separate questions. One deals kind of with some of the definitions around one particular grant program. The other deals with the process to finalize and interpret all of that for that program and others.
Did that help, Councilmember Lambert?
Yes, it did. Thank you. As I see number 3, it sounds to me like the people who are closest to the ground where the problems are will have a little more emphasis to get things moving faster, where number 4 seems to me like something for next month or the month after, where it'll give time for us each to give our parameters. But I am in not only daily, but sometimes every other hour with some of my chambers. So I know that they know, and they are living it all day long and in the evening. So thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to move to a vote on Amendment 3? I'm going to do a voice vote and see how that goes. All those in favor of Amendment 3, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
Okay. In the opinion of the chair, Amendment 3 carries on an 8-1 vote. Mr. Kim, it looks like we're on to Amendment 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 4, as Councilmember Koval's mentioned, it would strike. There's currently language that says that PSB should convene a work group to develop the implementation guidelines of the PSB Economic Development Relief Program. This amendment would strike that and replace that with language that says that PSB should consult with all 9 council members to develop the implementation guidelines.
Okay, and this one is appears to be sponsored by Councilmember Cole-Wells. Is that correct?
That is.
Councilmember Cole-Wells, would you like to move and speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of amendment number 4. And as I mentioned earlier and has been discussed, this amendment really strikes the underlying language that we had requiring that PSB convene a work group. That would have included the chair and vice chair of the budget committee and others to determine what would be the best ways to implement this program and develop criteria and so forth. Now, we heard last week from a very impassioned Councilmember Lambert who had an amendment and wished to have that adopted that would include the same type of work group for decisions being made in developing the program in the unincorporated area. And that was not adopted. And I've talked with Councilmember Lambert since then. And so what we included in the striker that is before you was language that would require that the Department of Local Services consult with all council members who have unincorporated King County areas in their district to seek guidance on developing their the criteria. And so what we're doing in this amendment is virtually the same type of thing, same type of approach. Instead of having the work group that was aforementioned, it would require that PSB instead consult with all 9 council members, so that this can be a really collaborative approach. Now, I think that the most important part about this, and the same with the language that's in the striker for the unincorporated areas, is we want to get money into the hands of the chambers and the small businesses as soon as possible. We want to get our economy going. We want to bring people back to work or be able to keep at work, whatever the case may be. And to take the extra time to convene work groups just doesn't seem to be the most expeditious approach. But I think that with this language, we will accomplish basically the same thing, but just be able to do it in a much more quick way. So I commend this to you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any comments or questions on this amendment? I see some heads shaking no. All right. If there's no questions or comments, I'll go ahead and call for a vote on amendment number 4. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Amendment 4 carries unanimously. See that amendment 5 has been withdrawn. So Andrew, would you please brief us on amendment 6?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 6 would make District 5 councilmanic grant allocations related to COVID-19.
Councilmember Up the Grove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of Amendment 6.
Okay, seems routine. Any comments or questions? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Amendment 6 carries unanimously. Amendment 7. Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 7, there's currently a expenditure restriction for a mitigation fund for $500,000 under the FMD operating appropriation unit to recover costs related to the county's isolation and quarantine sites. Current language says that this fund would be for cities. Councilmember Up the Grove would like to amend it to say local governments instead.
Okay, I'll call on Councilmember Up the Grove to move the amendment and speak to it, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of Amendment 7. And speaking to it, I was interested in having this fund available to local governments so that fire districts could be eligible to receive mitigation funds if they have expenses that are not covered by state and federal sources related to these temporary emergency sites. So that's the intent, and encourage your support.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, council members? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of Amendment 7, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Amendment 7 carries unanimously, which brings us to Amendment 8. Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember McDermott is offering Amendment 8, and currently there is a proviso under the FMD Capital Long-Term Lease Fund for it's restricting $1.2 million of that fund or of that appropriation for a proviso report related to the Renton Red Lion Motel. Currently, the language in the proviso requires that the council approve the report or approve the motion approving the report for the money to be released. This amendment would remove that requirement.
Okay, Councilmember McDermott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of Amendment 8.
Thank you. Please go ahead and speak to it.
Thank you. I want to be clear that the amendment leaves in place the word that Renton's so directly asked for and will provide answers that they're very much seeking that they argued at our CAL meeting last week. I'm asking for this that removes the requirement that the council approve the report because of the timeline that in being able to extend the de-intensification center For those of us who've had a chance to talk with Mr. Gill or others on the executive branch in the last week or so and learn about how people are affected by being in the Red Lion, having the de-intensification from a shelter, people who are now in the de-intensification shelter at the Red Lion have already found work, are sleeping better simply because they're not in a big shelter environment, but in individual rooms, have much easier and better access even to hygiene. And the success I'm hearing about is really fundamental. I would hate for the council meeting every other week with Cal meeting the opposite weeks and the timeline to in any way step up and complicate the ability to continue such success.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember McDermott. Comments or questions from other members?
Up the Grove.
Councilmember Up the Grove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think all of us on this council give our hearts and our time to public service because we care about others. You know, we care about people who've lost their homes. We care about people who are sick, whether that's a physical illness like COVID-19 or a mental illness or addiction disorder. And I think we all have family members or loved ones who've been sick or have fallen on hard times. And that's why we recognize that whether we have a home or not, or whether we're sick or healthy, we're all part of one community. I also believe in treating people with respect. And I expect longtime residents of Renton to treat newcomers to Renton like the guests at the Red Lion with respect. And I also expect the guests of the Red Lion to treat the surrounding businesses and other city residents with respect. Unfortunately, this isn't happening. Some of the guests at the Red Lion are engaging in behavior that's disrespectful to others. And this behavior is causing significant impacts and financial costs to city government and to other members of the community who own small businesses or who live and work nearby. And I care about those people too. Treating people with respect also means King County should treat our city partners with respect because our current emergency and because of this emergency proclamation, the decision by the county to operate a shelter in the city of Renton at the Red Lion was made without having to comply with city zoning or permits and with no community engagement prior to the decision. And I understand that's the nature of emergency decisions, but that also makes this situation fundamentally different than normal processes to site facilities. And so let me be clear, I believe South King County needs more services for people who've lost their homes or who are sick, from emergency shelter to permanent supportive housing and everything in between, including inpatient behavioral health services. And I've supported siting such facilities in my district, even in the face of local opposition. And I continue to participate in political coalitions to build support for these services in the South End. But this fundamentally different situation requires King County to be a more attentive partner to show that we do care about everyone and will treat everyone with respect. And so specifically, here's what I'll be looking for before I vote to accept the report and release future funding. First, a transition plan for the end of site use, including the criteria that'll be used to determine when the site will transition back, and including what the plans are to consult with the city to implement that plan. Second, provisions to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of the shelter residents at the conclusion of the use of the site. And finally, consideration of the equity and social justice impacts of the siting decision at this location when developing the transition plan and potential timelines. Without the leverage of a county council vote to release funding, I don't believe these goals will be achieved. And this proposed amendment, unfortunately, would completely remove that leverage. So I'm respectfully encouraging a no vote. And I'm confident we still have processes in place to reach a responsible resolution. Renton is a wonderful and diverse working class community. The mayor, the city council, many local business and community leaders have rejected the not in my backyard mentality and instead have recognized that in this unprecedented global pandemic, Renton has a role to play, and they've strived to be a good partner with the county, and we owe it to them to demonstrate our care and our respect in return. So I encourage a no vote.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Up the Grove. Other council members? All right, hearing none, I'll just weigh in. I'm going to support this amendment. I've had an opportunity to speak directly to the mayor and others from Renton. And I understand the concerns that they're raising, and I agree that there needs to be some way to address them. That's why I have changed my position and actually support the funding that's in this ordinance for, because I think I have been convinced that it was important for King County, not just the state of Washington, to show that we are prepared to support people and communities that are taking on a heavier burden. This is the largest de-intensification shelter in our system. And because of the way even the quarantine and other sites have been used, it is the largest, most populous site of any of our COVID-related sites that we have out there. And it's possible that it needs to be less large, just to be honest with you, that the size of it is part of the problem. But I don't know what the county does if the 90 days is up and we don't have an agreement between the city of Renton and the executive. And I think that could be pretty disastrous to suddenly just relocate folks who are already at grave risk of COVID and when the move would be so disruptive. I agree with Renton that we should continue as a county to work expeditiously and honorably with them towards what they've been calling an exit strategy. In other words, how does this use, which is not intended to stay in Renton forever, how does it get moved and when, and what are the triggering decision points? I am sympathetic to the concept that one community ends up carrying too much of the burden, then it starts to look unfair, and we should think about ways to spread it out equitably. Obviously, that was the original concern that we heard from some of the communities south of Seattle. And as in the event, those communities have not borne as much of the weight as it appeared at first, because the county did go and spread these sites out all around King County. So I think we can continue to work with Renton as a county toward a final resolution of the issues there without putting us at risk of missing our marks and therefore having this thing suddenly just shut down and withholding all of the funding for it in the meantime. So I'm going to vote yes on this amendment, but I continue to encourage the executive branch to work with the city of Renton towards agreements like we have with other cities that we're working in. There's an agreement with the city of Bellevue. I think that that would be a great model for Renton to also have access to, and I assume that they do. So I'm going to vote yes on this amendment, but I don't think we're as far apart as perhaps the yes and no votes might indicate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things I would respectfully request a roll call vote, number one. And number two, I want to thank Councilmember Upthgrove. Many of my colleagues can speak about trying to find that balance in between trying to help and recognize the emergency we have. But Dave has worked really hard on this issue. His district, which includes Kent and Renton areas, have been definitely impacted by countywide decisions. And I'm looking forward to seeing the county council as part of that decision-making process. So I will be supporting his position. Thank you, Madam Chair, but I respectfully request a roll call vote.
We'll do that. Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've really wrestled with this one, and I will also say that I do have now 3 hotels, at least in my district, that are de-intensification facilities, and I was not informed of that until one of them was even online when I found out about it. And I've also been informed that there are several others, I do not know how many, operating that have been opened up in South Lake Union. So I have 3+ de-intensification hotels. And I also have a large one going into Interbay, plus an isolation facility out on North Aurora. And so I understand the concern. I really do. And I've been trying to find a way to ameliorate the situation so that Councilmember Upthgrove is able to have resolution on this that could be supported by all, but it doesn't seem that that's going to be happening. I like everything in this, and I like the original language that Councilmember Upthgrove's amendment brought in last week. except for this issue about needing council approval right away. I mean, very, very fast. And that's the part that really concerns me. I think Councilmember McDermott's amendment comes close to what I would like to have, maybe not exactly, but I think removing that approval by the council is something that I can live with. And I think if there were a big issue, then Councilmember Updegrove or any of us could introduce new legislation to make a change. So I appreciate both sides of this, and I will support the amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. So can I have a clarification? The study is still going to be done, and then we will all get copies of it, and we can still all follow it, because I totally agree that there has been progress made in these people, but they have brought a lack of civility that is not common to the city of Renton. And I think that that's really unfortunate to have guests in your community and doing things that the rest of the community does not appreciate. So is this the holding of the money, or we would still get the report and then we can decide individually or in a next motion what we want to do with that? Is that right?
No. If this amendment passes, Councilmember, then we would still get the report and the money would be held, but it would only be held until we receive the report. Under the current language, without this amendment, the money would be held until we take action as a council to approve the report. That's the difference.
Okay, so we could decide from that report that in fact we do want to do something different with that money in the next month's appropriation.
We could decide not to release it. And then, yes, it would, I guess, be subject to some future budget action of some kind.
Okay, thank you.
Updegrove.
Zahalai.
Oh, please.
Councilmember Zahalai, and then Updegrove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say I will not be supporting the amendment, but I just need to clarify a few things before doing so. I don't support not in my backyard mentality. I don't support the send them back to where they came from mentality. And I don't support talking about and treating unhoused people like they're a burden. But I do support an equity impact review in all siting decisions, especially in South King County. I want to see that, and I want to have the leverage of approving or rejecting a report if it does not have that. We saw that in the quarantine facility decisions that the actual equity impact review tool was not used. And I don't want that to happen again. And that's the only reason why I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Updegrove?
Pass.
Okay. Any other comments before I call for the roll call vote?
Claudia needs a
Okay. Madam Chair, would you please call the roll on amendment number 8?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
No.
Councilmember Dembowski votes no. Councilmember Dunn.
No.
Councilmember Dunn votes no. Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Aye.
Councilmember Cole-Wells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
No.
Councilmember Lambert votes no. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Updegrove. Councilmember Updegrove.
Nope.
Councilmember Updegrove votes no. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
No.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes no. Councilmember Zahalai.
No.
Councilmember Zahalai votes no. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 3 ayes and 6 noes. The ayes are Councilmember Cole-Wells, McDermott, and Balducci.
Okay, thank you. Amendment 8 does not pass, and that brings us to Amendment 9. Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment 9 would proviso the $8 million of the allocation from the that would be going to Visit Seattle and Seattle Southside to require the executive transmit a plan in consultation with Visit Seattle and the Seattle Southside to describe how the funds will be utilized and how it will be utilized to develop and implement campaigns to promote tourism in the county.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Councilmember McDermott, could I prevail upon you to move this for me as I'm the sponsor? Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and speak to it. The idea here is to understand what $8 million in tourism money, how it will be expended, what for, and how it meets the goals of the proposal, which are very, valuable goals to help to re-engage the economy. That there's an emphasis in here, and the language is in the amendment itself, on making sure that we're doing so safely. I would love to see us hit the ball out of the park as a community, have tourism dollars spent at exactly the right time in exactly the right ways to maximize safe travel and get people in hotel beds and in restaurant chairs. I don't know that our crystal ball ever is that completely clear to know exactly when that is. And now it's particularly unclear because we don't want to be encouraging people to travel here. Well, if the virus is still raging and we're having a second wave and all of that. And I heard that quite clearly in not just public comment today, although I heard it today, but also in communications I've had between the last meeting and now, that of course this is meant to be done in a safe way. I just feel that with the with the size of the money that we are going to be releasing to these organizations, it would be helpful to approve a spending plan in advance. And that's what this amendment does. I've heard quite clearly the concern that this will slow things down. And, it's a step. It takes time to take a step. But as the chair and the person who receives things, I will commit to move it through as quickly as possible. We can expedite when we receive the report. It does not need to be a lengthy affair. It is not my intent to try to write a tourism plan. I intend to vote on the tourism plan because I am leaving this to people who understand what it is much better than I do. But it's an accountability measure, and it helps us to stay engaged in what we're doing with a fairly significant chunk of funds. And I urge your support. Council members. Councilmember Dombowski, you waving?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. These are fairly perfunctory, but in this case, I think it's piling on. We've just advanced, basically what we're authorizing to do is advance the money they were otherwise entitled to get with no plan. And this does add time and delay. We've been provided with the plan already. And frankly, it treats them unfairly compared to the other recipients of the dollars. We received no plan on spending $135 million of revenue money on a baseball stadium. So I think this is a little unfair to our trusted partners. It slows them down at a time when they're losing staff, puts an unnecessary burden on them. I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. Other council members? All right, I think you've heard two sides of this tale, and I will let it stand that way.
Zahalai.
Okay, Councilmember Zahalai.
Thank you, Councilmember Balducci. Councilmember Dombowski, you said a plan has already been sent to us. Is that correct?
Yes. I had asked when I met with Mr. Norwalk on March 8th that they put together a proposal and transmit it to the executive's office, which they did. And it has, as I mentioned, and it's been shared with anybody who wanted it. I don't know if all members got it, but I had suggested at the committee the whole meeting last week that it be shared. So I've been told by Mr. Gill that it's going to be the same thing that comes over. So again, it's not an unusual thing to have a plan, but we're not in usual times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just let me say before calling on Councilmember Colwell is that I did receive an email from Tom, and it included documents that laid out what I would say is a plan and an approach to a marketing campaign. It doesn't answer all of the questions that are in this plan, but it does suggest that to create the plan that this amendment would call for would not be a difficult thing because much of it is already in place, although that's just one of the two organizations. So Councilmember Colwell, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe I did send Mr. Norwalk's email to all of you a while back. I would have to say I'd rather not have this amendment before us. I'm very bothered by the earlier passage of the other amendment. I thought we were voting on amendment 1.0 and instead we were voting on 1.1. I guess that was my short sight to not make sure, but I think we've gone a long ways from what the original intention of this legislation was. Visit Seattle and Seattle's South Side are professional organizations that do great work. And I agree with Councilmember Dombowski. I think this is really unnecessary. I don't think this is a big deal and it's by itself, but we do not ask similar things of other organizations in this underlying legislation. So I wish that it would be withdrawn, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Up at the Grove.
Councilmember Up the Grove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the intent of this. I'm one who likes to know the plans. I think I'm comfortable knowing that there's going to be a contract in place and that the contract between the county and these organizations will have whatever performance metrics that the executive deems appropriate and whatever and that plan that's been transmitted can be incorporated into that. So given that I think this is going to require a contract, I think that's going to be sufficient for me.
Okay. Other members? Okay, if I may, I'll just go ahead and close. I appreciate the discussion on this. I can see that there are different points of view. I'm going to ask for a roll call vote again because we have different points of view and I want to make sure everybody's vote is tallied. I have a thing that I have said over the years so many times that it's become a boring, repetitious thing that I say, and that is, I really wish that we allowed human services agencies to have the kind of flexibility with government funding that we give in the economic development zone. We require them to have all kinds of reporting metrics before we ever hand any money over to them to help the most vulnerable people among us. And this is really very perfunctory. And as I said, mostly already completed, not entirely, but mostly, and it shouldn't be very burdensome at all. And I think it's a transparency measure for the public who, again, don't have great eyes on what we're doing right now, not through any lack of effort of ours because of this situation that we're in and how we're having to manage. So I would urge your support. And I'm going to ask the clerk to go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dombowski.
No.
Councilmember Dombowski votes no. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
No.
Councilmember Colwells votes no. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Up the Grove.
Nope.
Councilmember Up the Grove votes no. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 6 ayes and 3 noes. Councilmembers Dombowski, Colwells, and Up the Grove voting no.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Amendment 9 carries. And that brings us to our final amendment, Amendment 10. Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, after all that, this should be easy. I'd like to move amendment number 10.
Please speak.
Thank you. So what this is asking for some transparency. And I'd like to thank Dwight for his help in this. And in fact, he offered even more transparency than I'm even asking for, which made me smile. So Dwight, thank you for that. Basically what this says is that we would get a report or a list of what grants were received in each district. And that will help us to make more informed decisions in the future budgets about where the needs have been met and unmet throughout the entire county. And this would not encumber any funds, would not require any extra work until the funds has been spent, and requires no action on our part once we receive it. It would give them 30 days after the money has been spent to let us know. And this should not slow down the spending of the funds in any way. And again, this would be adding greater transparency. And I thank the executive branch for working with me. So I'd like to ask for a do pass recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Lambert. Questions or comments on Amendment 10? Councilmember Colwell, are you signaling? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not looking at the language in the striking amendment right now, but would you just let us know which are sections 3, 12, 21, and 22?
Are you asking me? Because I don't think I can.
Whoever. Councilmember Lambert or Andrew?
Yeah, Councilmember Lambert or Andrew.
This is Andrew Kim, Madam Chair. Section 21 are the appropriations for the tourism, and Section 22 is the appropriation for the homeless youth program.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember?
Did I hear you say what is in sections 3 and 12?
Councilmember Colwell, Section 3 is the PSB appropriation for the Economic Development Relief Program, and Section 12 is the DLS Small Business Relief Program.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ruthergrove?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like this one. I know the executive branch has been sending over some detailed expenditure reports after the fact, but getting it in this format is useful. And the reason I like it is I think this will be a useful communications tool to share with our communications staff. To highlight the good work the county is doing throughout the county, and knowing what's in our community will allow us to share that with the community. So I like it.
It has the added benefit of being useful. Other councilmember comments or questions? All right, all those in favor of Amendment 10, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment 10 carries. So that brings us to the COVID-19 emergency omnibus as amended. And we then need a title amendment, and I'm going to need some help to know which one. Mr. Kim, can you help with that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It will be Title Amendment T2.
Okay. Councilmember Colwell, would you move the title amendment, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the title amendment. I want to make sure that we did move the striking amendment. I think we did.
We did, and then we've amended it, and now we're going to amend it with the title. Then we will be back to the striking amendment and then final passage. So we got 3 more
Yes,
steps.
I realized all that. Thank you.
Okay, T2 is before us. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Title is amended. And now we are on the striking amendment. Councilmember Colwell, would you like to speak now or upon final passage?
On final passage. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else want to speak at this point on the striking amendment as amended?
Dembowski with question.
Please go ahead, Councilmember.
Thank you. And I don't know if we have Dwight or Andrew, maybe is the person to answer, but I want to make sure I understand the state of this budget appropriation as it stands amended, vis-a-vis its impact on our general fund with the Councilmember Balducci's Amendment 1.1, which was adopted 5-4. I understand, and I'd like to get confirmation of this, that what that amendment did was, with respect to $4 million of money, which came to the council today with a recommendation that it be paid out of the lodging tax account. And the uses of that $4 million are $2 million for culture, for arts and heritage organizations, $1 million for science organizations, $750,000 for music venues, $250,000 for arts education organizations. That $4 million will now come out of the general fund if this budget carries. And we'll set aside the $8 million tourism change.
This is Andrew Kim. That's correct, Councilmember Dembowski.
And that's the final decision today. We're going to go to our general fund for those purposes and spend $4 million. The general fund that we, a couple years ago, imposed a road use charge on people to advance funds to secure shelter space and day centers. And we can't hire enough sheriff's deputies. And our public health department is constantly scraping the bottom to stay afloat. We're now under that amendment going to spend 4 million general fund dollars. I sat on the budget committee most of my years on the council, and it is always a struggle. And I'm struggling right now to understand how that is fiscally responsible. There's doing the right thing, and I think a lot of that's the right thing, but there's also doing it the right way. And I want to understand the implications of 4 million general fund dollars being spent vis-a-vis the priorities we're facing. When Dwight told us in his last briefing, we're estimating a $79 million deficit in our general fund. And now we're going to spend it on those items, including $750,000 on nightclubs. Help me understand how that makes sense.
So I'll jump in here because I think it's a policy question, really. And
well, actually, I want to make sure factually, Madam Chair, that I have it correct. That is the be all end all of where the dollars are coming from. Is there?
I heard Mr. Kim say yes.
Yeah.
Dwight looked like he wants it.
Yeah, I will confirm that. That's yes. And Councilman Dembowski, the number you're remembering is just the sales tax loss for the general fund. So the overall general fund financial situation will clearly be significantly worse than that for a variety of other reasons.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say I was comfortable using a dedicated fund for the purposes for which it's dedicated. But going and taking away sheriff's deputies, public health dollars, shelter dollars, human services money, legal aid, civil legal aid still comes out of the general fund. Domestic violence prevention services comes out of the general fund, and spending it on those purposes, that's a choice I'm really having difficulty with the massive deficits. And I know what's coming in terms of cuts this fall, having difficulty processing why that should be done.
Okay, so now let me just say this. The purpose of the amendment, since I'm the one who offered it, was to make it clear that we are not, by this action, rearranging the previously agreed upon after a great deal of public debate and pain, frankly. We're not rearranging the divisions of how we're doing lodging tax at this time. We can do that again. And in fact, I understand that based on what we're doing today, anything we're doing with or without those amendments, we're going to have to revisit that ordinance that allocated the lodging tax. So that will be before us again. We are, as you yourself said, going to be talking about how to potentially reimburse some of this out of the CARES Act funding, which is intended to support organizations in part that are suffering due to the COVID-19. It doesn't have to stay in the general fund. And yeah, I may agree with you that it should not. That's just where we're parking it today. And we will be doing an interfund loan. We have a longer term discussion about how we pay that interfund loan back. That was discussed earlier. We are going to have a new non-COVID supplemental coming very soon. We're going to have a new COVID supplemental coming very soon. We will be addressing all of these issues. It is certainly not my intent, and I don't think it was anybody else's intent, that this tourism support for whenever it is appropriate to start inviting people to come into our community, business support in order to stand up organizations when they can stand up under the reopening phases in the governor's guidance, and certain kinds of business supports like our cultural sector, which I think we've all said is a great source of living jobs, and it brings people here and helps to support tourism. Nobody is saying that we should set that off against other important priorities. We're doing this now first. If it had been me, I would have said we should have done this package along with a larger package that involved the more direct supports. But we're doing this one first. That's the way it came forward. We have things we will have to fix up afterward. I'm comfortable voting for this package today. I think it does a lot of good. I think it's got more transparency on it. I also think that it needs more work on the revenue end, but I think we're leaving it at a place today where we know that, and I'm comfortable with that for today. So I'm going to support the striking amendment. And by the way, it has been brought to my attention that you don't do title amendments before you vote on striking amendments. So we're going to vote on the striking amendment. And then assuming it passes, we'll do the title amendment again. My apologies to Council Member Colwell's. So any other comments before calling for a vote on the striking amendment as amended?
Well, I just want some clarification from Mr. Dively that we, with all due respect, we are choosing between competing general fund demands when we spend $4 million of general fund that came before us today with a dedicated tourism revenue source, and now it's coming out of our general fund. Can that be unwound? I mean, it would be more comforting if it was conditioned upon expressly, since it's now the fund source is coming out of one that is just really tough shape. It's in tough shape, our general fund, if it was conditioned upon receiving the CARES Act money, but that's not the current case. It's a hope. I would be more comfortable with that.
Well, Councilmember, you always can change this in one of two ways. You could, and we need to finish the legal review that you referred to earlier, make a decision later on to use the CARES Act money to cover these costs. That obviously means other things are not funded, but that's a choice that will be before you once we confirm that works legally. And then, of course, you always have the ability to disappropriate this at some point and replace it with an appropriation from a different fund that also legally could be used for this purpose. So there remains future flexibility, but you are correct that as of today, this action would say, let's take $4 million of general fund for this purpose.
Does the executive support taking $4 million of general fund for this purpose? Or do you as our CFO of the county?
Well, we did not propose this. I have certainly never asked the executive whether he would have proposed $4 million of general fund for this purpose. I suspect his answer would be no, but I don't know that for sure.
And part of the reason we don't know, speaking of transparency, is because Amendment 1.1, which was adopted today, was handed out today. And folks in the industry that thought that they knew what they were providing comment on today never got to see it. So it's troubling in many respects to me.
Okay, other members, comments, questions?
Zahalai.
Councilmember Zahalai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Point of clarification, did we vote for 1 and 1.1 separately?
I offered Amendment 1.1 and it passed. I did not offer Amendment 1.0.
Okay, thank you.
Pausing for a second for a technical question. I just received a message that maybe our feed cut off on KCTV. Can Melanie or Angel, can one of you look into that, please?
Yeah, it's cut off. I'm seeing Jackie Ablau.
I will contact them. Thank you.
Went too long.
You'll all have to give your speeches again.
Okay. I'm prepared to call for a vote on the striking amendment as amended unless Councilmember Colwell would like to say anything to close on this vote now.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was prepared to be really pleased about our vote on the striking amendment today, not knowing if it would be unanimous or what. My heart's hanging a little bit right now, in all honesty. I don't think this is as good as what we started off with today with the striking amendment, with some really good amendments that were adopted. I do not think that 1.1 was a good one. And the issue that had come up was the need for money for affordable housing. Well, we're going to have a lot of demands, requests, pleas, all sorts of things, because people are so hurting. And I think that I believe very strongly that Councilmember Dembowski's initial idea, which he took to Dwight, took to the executive about using the future lodging tax was a very good idea. And I want to commend him for that. And I want to commend Dwight Dively for putting that in motion and providing the analysis, and a lot of other people, and including our hardworking staff. I'm going to vote for this, but I'm very worried as budget chair about what we're doing to the general fund. And I find that there's a little bit of irony here behind our adopting 1.1 on a 5-4 vote. And the plea in that, and one of the main arguments was that we didn't want to bring jeopardy to our funding of other needs, and affordable housing being a very strong one. Our difficulties a year and a half ago with the lodging tax legislation was painful for, I think, everybody. And I think we all have the same intention and the desires to have our county be whole economically. Agreed with the prevailing vote on that measure, and I'm seeing some of that come back to us now. But the reality is that I think there are going to be repercussions, and for us to say, well, we can revisit this, I'm very troubled by the $4 million plus, as I heard Dwight indicate. I did send out a memo to you all today about getting your input for the COVID omnibus emergency supplemental budget that we'll be taking up next. So please look for that. And I'm afraid now that given our actions today with the amendment, that some of the priorities are going to have to change. But with that, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm ready for the vote.
Okay. So
A point of order.
Yes, who's?
It's Dembowski, sorry. I want to understand if we have two votes here. Do we have a vote on the amended striking amendment and then a vote on final passage, or is this final?
We have three. We have a vote on the striking amendment as amended, then a vote on a title amendment, which I did prematurely, then we will have final passage.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'm going to ask the clerk to please go ahead and call the roll on striking amendment S1 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
No.
Councilmember Dembowski votes no. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Aye.
Councilmember Cole-Wells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Up the Grove.
Nope.
Councilmember Up the Grove votes no. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
No.
Councilmember Zahalai votes no. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 6 ayes and 3 noes. Councilmembers Dembowski, Up the Grove, and Zahalai voting no.
Okay, so striking amendment 1 passes, and now, with apologies again, now is when we do the title amendment, and I wonder if Councilmember Cole-Wells would move title T2 again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move T2 again.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor of title amendment T2, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Title amendment carries. Now we have reached final passage. And Councilmember Cole-Wells, you can go first or last or both. Your call.
Actually, I'd like to go last. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Dembowski, did I see you have your hand?
I'll just stand on my prior comments. I think that we have done something we're going to kind of regret unless we're able to save it with respect to the general fund. And I've heard my colleagues ask for more sheriff's deputies, more support for public defense, more support for the prosecutor, more support for domestic violence organizations and legal aid organizations and shelter space and the public health department, our permitting department, our local services department, our roads. When we write the budget, unless we fix this today, will be $4 million less for each and every one of those needs. And I just am disappointed. I've made my record known there by voting no on the striking amendment, but I will support the supplemental budget on final passage because I think we need to get aid out to the community. That's the bad side, the general fund hit. There's some good stuff in here. I'm very proud of the work of Councilmember Zahalai leading the effort to bring support in a big way to the unincorporated area business community. I've got some concerns about handing checks out to small businesses and that some may lose out, and it may be inherently unfair, but I'm hopeful that things are worked out to prevent that as much as possible. Councilmember Up the Grove's notion of supporting our chambers and chamber-like organizations throughout the county is great. I really liked working with him on that, and I'm proud of that work. And I think it's going to do good and get it into expert organizations who are going to make a difference on the ground in this time of crisis. And I also, in that package, like the support to our city partners throughout the county who have varying degrees of expertise and capacity with economic development. I trust them. They are close to their business communities and their local communities to spend the dollars in that $3 million bucket to do good work. And I think it's important that we partner with them. So I didn't want to be all negative. There's some really good stuff in here. Got those concerns, but we'll figure it out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Dembowski. Other members on final passage? Councilmember McDermott.
Madam Chair, I recognize Councilmember Dembowski's concern that he expresses about the general fund that many of us would want to do more with, of course. We have before, and even now we want to even more. And at the same time, as I spoke to earlier, we have a pressing need for more affordable housing in our county and our region at a point in time when, given the recession, that need will even increase greater. So I think making sure that we're protecting that long-term investment while addressing our short-term crisis is imperative. And I'm pleased with the balance we're working to strike there. And more importantly, I want to underscore the value of being supportive of economic recovery and supporting that both with the investment through PSB to chambers and community-based organizations that will help and support business. And most particularly, the investment in the Department of Local Services. And I really want to thank the council last week in the Committee of the Whole for supporting the amendment I offered to double that the amount invested in unincorporated King County from $2 to $4 million, and for inclusion of Councilmember Colwell's and Councilmember Dembowski in writing the striker that's before us today in really strong equity language, recognizing that while everyone is affected, those who are historically disadvantaged are even more so in this recession and crisis. And so I really respect the inclusion of the equity language I'd requested in the striker that came before us today. We're making some really strong steps in economic recovery and supporting people in need at a great time in our history. And I'm proud to be able to support this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Anyone else? I'll say a few words before final closing, if that's okay, Councilmember Colwells. There is so much economic pain happening out in our county right now, as it is across the country and the world. And there's almost nothing that we could do that wouldn't help. Every sector is hurting. Every thing that we usually invest in as a government is going to be challenged. Our basic government services are going to be challenged. Our human services and nonprofits that serve people in need are going to be challenged. Our people everywhere throughout King County are being challenged. We started this year with something over 125,000 or so households severely cost burdened in our community. And that means that they're paying 50% of their income on housing. That means, as we like to say frequently, that they are one missed paycheck away from being at risk of becoming homeless. And then suddenly tens of thousands of people all miss those paychecks. And so it is incumbent upon us to do what we can in every way we can. And so to the points that have been raised by Council members Colwells and Dembowski repeatedly, and correctly so, helping to recharge the economy is one very important thing that we as a government need to do in order to help stand us back up into some semblance of a functioning economy again. I am personally really looking forward to us getting to work with urgency on helping the people who are really directly suffering. I am looking forward to what we do after this, and that includes adjusting whatever needs to be adjusted about funding sources so that we are both holding harmless the good work that we all fought for, and we all fought for a lot, as much of the lodging tax to be in affordable housing as possible. And we may want to rethink that when we see what happens to the lodging tax over time, even with this investment that we're making today. But we should see what happens, and we should have an open debate about that when we make that decision. And all of the people who are relying on our work in housing, nothing got easier for them. It was a long-term, slow-rolling crisis where smallish numbers of people were being harmed all the time, is now a huge immediate crisis where a large number of people are being harmed right now. And we have to deal with both of those. And so that's just one very large example, but there's more. And so I really look forward to, as Councilmember Colwell said, we have step after step after step that we have to take. This is just the first step. And our first step is to put money into a tourism campaign, small business support, and some cultural arts organizations, among other things. These are good things, but I'm looking forward to getting to the really, truly emergent issues that are right in front of our people right this minute. So I want to vote yes on this. I want to move it into operations so that it can start to go. And then I want to get to that work that adds on the help for our communities badly in need, because we're going to need wave after wave after wave of support, because there's going to be wave after wave after wave of need. And there's only so much we as a county can do. I'm really pleased to be trying to do it. These are difficult decisions at times, but let's take this vote, let's move forward and continue to try to help our hurting community. Councilmember Colwell's to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your words and your sentiments. We all perhaps have a little bit of a different lens on this. I would see that all that we're doing, including the tourism promotion and helping with our arts, culture, science, heritage institutions, are really getting people back to work too. I mean, we are really stepping up to make sure that people who are hurting and families who are hurting really horribly, that many of them are going to have an opportunity as soon as it's safe to do so, by putting in place the mechanisms and the infrastructure to be able to have people earning a living again while doing something really positive by promoting tourism. But I'd like, in commending this to you, and again, I have a little bit of a heavy heart with it. I don't think we're going completely in the way that's going to work out the best, certainly not for our general fund. But I'd like to just remind us all about what else this legislation does. It provides funding for a variety of programs that are very needed, such as youth homelessness. We got so wrapped up in the tourism part of this, I think we haven't spent much time talking about what else that's really positive in here. Also, as we mentioned, the relief for small businesses and the chambers, which promotes jobs and money for us. Expanded funding for the Community Development Block Grant. Increased capacity for newly added isolation and quarantine facilities. Support for the tourism industries, as we mentioned. We also, though, have come up with a really robust spending plan, and mainly aimed at small businesses, organizations, and our most vulnerable. We can't forget that with all of what we're doing for our isolation, quarantine, assessment and recovery, and desensitization venues. We are helping some of the most struggling individuals who really need the help now. We're also providing the means for some individuals who are working in the healthcare industry to be able to get increased pay if they are being shifted to venues that they had not agreed to when they started work. Ultimately, what we're doing with this legislation is to help our economy recover, provide stimulus that's very needed, and in doing so, be prepared so that we have the means in place to help our families and our residents throughout the whole county. Really critical. I'm glad that we're moving this forward. I personally think the executive was very wise to have this come forward at this time, after the one we did earlier with regard to providing childcare for first responders and essential workers. We will have the next COVID emergency supplemental omnibus budget be transmitted to us on or around June 11th. It's been delayed a little bit. And we're going to have our biennial third supplemental omnibus budget transmitted to us on or around May 29th. So we've got a lot coming forward. I'm going to be glad to get this one over with, and it will pave the way for a lot of good to come. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Colwells. That was to close, and so at this point, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on final passage.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Before we close, I would just like to take one moment to thank our staff. They've really been stellar. This has been hard. This is my first budget to do, to coordinate. But I know that Andrew and Tillery and Jeff and Kendall and Bruce and Wendy and Tara, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple of others, but they've spent just extraordinary amounts of time on weekends. We all know what happens with budgets. And now they've got to look forward to 2 more of them coming up pretty quickly. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know that they were available nights and weekends and working on amendments and answering who knows how many questions. So I second that. All right, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on final passage?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski. Councilmember Dembowski. Councilmember Dunn.
Just kidding, I'm here. Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
Aye.
Councilmember Colwells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Updegrove.
Aye.
Councilmember Updegrove votes aye. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair votes aye. Councilmember Dembowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Dembowski votes aye. Madam Chair, the vote is 9 ayes, 0 noes.
All right, by our vote, let's see if I can remind myself what the number was. By our vote, we have approved ordinance, proposed substitute ordinance 2020-0177 as amended. All right, we have just a couple more things to do here, and the next one is proposed ordinance 2020-0178. Councilmember McDermott, would you please move that and put it before us?
I move adoption of ordinance 2020-178, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we have Jeff Mumm of our central policy staff to give a quick overview of this item, and then some executive staff available for questions. Jeff, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So this proposed ordinance would ratify a settlement agreement between the King County and the King County Corrections Guild regarding the calculation of certain types of overtime pay. This agreement is effective through December 31st, 2019. So this is for the old contract. The county and the guild had initially thought they had addressed this issue during the prior contract negotiations. However, the county's payroll system could not support the negotiated calculation for these types of overtime pay. The settlement agreement provides for back payment that is estimated to be the difference in the pay that the employees would have received had the county been applying the overtime calculation to all the contractual overtime and other multipliers of pay. So there's really 4 points to it. There's back payments. So this is $8,000 a month, totaling $328,000 for the period between December 26th and December of 2019. So it amounts to about $415 per guild member in a one-time payment. And then they increase the top step longevity pay from it's a 5% right now, and increases that to 5.25%, which is about $185 per guild member who qualifies per year. And then there's an increasement in the firearms qualified premium. So right now that premium is 3%. This would increase to 3.33%. And then they better define these certain overtime criteria within the new agreement. So that, and then just over the fiscal implications. So there's the back pay, which is 328,000, and then the cumulative of those two enhancements is another $162,000 for this agreement, and that is the very high level of it. On page 411 of the packet is the report that OLR puts together on these types of agreements for us, and they do a really good job with their summaries. And then the actual agreement is on page 407 of your packets. Happy to answer questions, and I believe Bob Railton's on the line to answer more detailed questions. Oh, and there's Susie Sloniker. You are muted.
Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, I've seen Mr. Railton. There he is. He's still with us. And I see Ms. Sloniker. Did either of you want to add anything to that summary before we go into discussion, Bob or Susie?
No, Madam Chair, Susie Sloniker. At one point, Mr. Railton indicated he had some difficulty staying on the line, so I don't know if he's come back, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the members have.
Thank you very much for that. Members, questions, comments on this? The one question I do have is it's technical and it doesn't need to be answered for me to vote on it. Is that just when is the current full CBA for the Corrections Guild up again?
Madam Chair, Bob Railton. Hi, Deputy Director for Office of Labor Relations. Yeah, I did have some technical difficulties. Thank you, Ms. Sloniker. We are currently bargaining for the successor contract that just expired in 2019. And the parties are moving into mediation, and we're scheduled for mediation dates in early June. So we reached impasse at the table, mediation's the next step.
Okay, thank you for that. And this is a targeted fix to a specific problem while the larger negotiation continues to go on.
That is correct, Madam Chair. And this actually dates back to the 2013 to 2016 agreement where the issue arose and finally getting resolved now. So it's got to carry forward effect, at least for the next successor contract.
It is a long time ago. Okay. Anybody else have questions or comments on this item before we move to a vote? Okay, thank you for that. And I assume that Labor Relations will hang on for the next one. And I will ask our clerk to please call the roll on this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Dembowski votes aye. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
Aye.
Councilmember Colwells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Yes.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Upthegrove.
Aye.
Councilmember Upthegrove votes aye. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 9 ayes, 0 noes.
By our vote, we've approved proposed ordinance 2020-0178. Brings us to proposed ordinance number 2020-0179. Councilmember McDermott, would you move this item, please?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I understand we have Mary Bergenon here to, Bergenon. I'm reading your name and it makes me pronounce it wrong, but it's Bergenon here to give an overview of this item. If you would please go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Can hear you fine. Thank you.
Great, thanks. This is Mary Bergenon from the council staff for the record, and the materials begin on page 443 of your packets if you're interested in reading along. This is a memorandum of agreement that would cover approximately 500 nurses who are part of 2 bargaining units within the Washington State Nurses Association, staff nurse unit and a nurse supervisor unit. The memorandum would allow for nurses to be redeployed with short notice to emergency roles addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, including at King County isolation quarantine sites and assessment and recovery sites, as well as to direct patient care at jail facilities. The MOA would provide for both voluntary and involuntary, if needed, job redeployment. It would provide for a 25% pay premium for hours worked on these COVID care functions, although for jail health services, since there's already a premium, the added premium would be 10% on top of that. It would also provide a $4 per hour pay supplement for nighttime service hours between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., although that does not apply to care in jail facilities. And it would also set conditions of work for these work situations, including orientation and training, personal protective equipment, assignment protocols, the potential need for mandatory overtime, a provision to allow nurses to refuse an assignment due to personal risk factors, and security at work sites. And it would provide temporary enhanced workers' compensation and leave protocols. This MOA took effect on March 13th, which was the date that nurses first worked at the Kent COVID care site, and would extend for the duration of the pandemic response effort. The fiscal impact of this MOA is estimated at $483,000, which you just approved as part of the supplemental budget ordinance. And executive staff indicate that this amount is anticipated to cover 3 months of operations at assessment and recovery sites and 6 months of operations at isolation quarantine sites. And I'll just note for the record that there is currently bargaining underway on a new collective bargaining agreement with these two bargaining units, but the executive has asked that this MOA be considered now, given the urgency of the COVID care response. That concludes my report. We do have staff from Office of Labor Relations here if there are additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Questions or comments from members? I'll just say, listening and sort of skimming through earlier the approach, it seems to make good sense to me. These are some of the members of our workforce that are absolutely, on the very, very leading edge of the front lines, working with people who are sick and they have to go to work, they have to brave the virus, they have to go home, and so I think that. Doing what we can for those folks is extremely important. Was that, Councilmember Uppergrove, were you waving at me?
Oh, I was going to comment if I might.
Oh, well, I will call it. I read your mind or you waved at me, one or the other. Councilmember Uppergrove, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You read my mind. I think I turned my camera back on. Madam Chair, when we're meeting in person, we have a mechanism to sign on as a co-sponsor of legislation. Is it possible to do that verbally here remotely?
I think we have decided and done that previously. Isn't that right, Melanie?
That's correct.
I'd like to request the clerk add my name as a co-sponsor, please.
Okay, will do.
That typically sets off feeding frenzy. Anybody else want to be a co-sponsor? Councilmember Colwell's raised her hand. Councilmember McDermott raised his hand.
Well, Madam Chair.
Were you already the sponsor?
I am already a sponsor, but I want to speak when I get a moment.
I got you. Councilmember Dembowski gives a thumbs up to be a co-sponsor.
I like that.
Sponsor. Anybody else?
Hello.
I would like to be a co-sponsor. It's like it suddenly turned into an auction in here.
Love us.
Okay. Councilmember Cole-Wells, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a co-sponsor already, which I was very pleased to sign on to this, I'd just like to echo basically what you said. This is really important. And all around the country, at least when I see this on CNN and other places, we see neighborhoods applauding our public health nurses and other hospital employees. I wish we could do this for everybody, but they are making huge sacrifices with the lengthy hours going into places that hold a real risk for them. And we're talking about our own facilities here, not the ERs and the major hospitals, but this is really critical that we recognize and give homage to these people who occasionally in other areas, not here so much, but have sacrificed their lives eventually, and certainly brought home some concerns on the part of their families in terms of their mother or their father or brother or nephew, whomever, coming into the house after being at work. So I applaud your bringing this forward. I was glad to sign on as a co-sponsor, and I hope we can all support it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think that is a very fitting way to close discussion. Unless there's anything urgent, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dembowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Dembowski votes aye. Councilmember Dunn.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn votes aye. Councilmember Colwells.
Aye.
Councilmember Colwells votes aye. Councilmember Lambert.
Aye.
Councilmember Lambert votes aye. Councilmember McDermott.
Aye.
Councilmember McDermott votes aye. Councilmember Up the Grove.
Aye.
Councilmember Up the Grove votes aye. Councilmember Von Reitbauer.
Aye.
Councilmember Von Reitbauer votes aye. Councilmember Zahalai.
Aye.
Councilmember Zahalai votes aye. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the vote is 9 ayes, 0 noes.
By our vote, we have adopted proposed ordinance 2020-0179 unanimously. If there's no objection, the published marked agenda, together with any changes made in today's meeting, will stand as approved as the first reading and referral of ordinances items 12 through 16, 18, and 19 as listed. Proposed ordinance 2020-0187, item 17 was introduced as title only, and unfortunately, we weren't able to get text of the legislation filed with the clerk, so it is removed from the agenda and will come back on the agenda when it has been supplemented with text. That brings us to the end of our agenda, and we have.
Madam Chair.
Yes, is that Councilmember Zahalai?
Councilmember Dunn, point of personal privilege. Point of personal privilege.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Instead of, obviously, we're short and compressed time period for meetings, and normally we do recognitions. I just want to mention that this week is Police Week. In addition to our first responders and the healthcare workers that are out there, we've got the folks on the front lines helping to make sure that these rules are put in place and followed, and helping in volunteering capacities all across the county. It's Police Week, and I just wanted to recognize it. Thank you for recognizing me.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunn. That was under other business. Is there any other business, council members?
Zahalai.
Zahalai, please. Councilmember Zahalai, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to note that this is maybe the 10th time that my voice was confused for Councilmember Dunn's, and I take that as a compliment.
Let's just both have the deep voices. I don't know what I'm doing. I got to keep my eye on the yellow boxes. Then I'll know who's talking. I apologize to both of you, council members.
No, I take it as a compliment.
Okay. Before we adjourn, we have committed to make sure that technical difficulties didn't keep anyone from voting. I was tracking, and I believe we got everybody's vote on every item, but I just want to double check with the clerk before we adjourn.
That is correct, Madam Chair. I have all the votes recorded.
Okay. With that, we have reached the end of our agenda, and thank you all very much. We will be adjourned.